Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We do not yet have a quorum, but in discussion, we do not need a quorum because we'll not take a vote until the last item, next to the last. So if we could, we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a long agenda with a lot of interesting things, so let's get started. Any questions, comments, personal matters to take up before we get started this morning? I did have a call last night, don't know how the lady got my cell phone, from someone watching on the internet who had been the victim of domestic assault, and she was extraordinarily interested. I invited her back next time to be a member of the audience if she would like to, and she had some great comments. I advised her to get with a group in Chattanooga and give her input and get started and help us, because we want to do the right thing and do something that would work. So if sometimes you think people aren't watching, I'm afraid that they are. So anyway, appreciate her for taking time to do that. Any other matters before we get started? All right, first on our agenda this morning, Public Chapter 819, Acts of 2018, 5G technology. We have a panel today, and let's get started on that.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Matt Owen. I'll introduce our panelists, and then I'll ask them to come up to the table to start their presentations. Just as brief background, these presentations are, as the Chairman said, they are in response to the study directed by Public Chapter 819, Acts of 2018. That act made changes to state law governing the deployment of small wireless facilities in Tennessee, and it also directs the Commission to study the Act's effect in Tennessee, identify best practices, both from the perspective of stakeholders and from a review of other states, and to identify opportunities to advance transportation in the state through applications supported by small wireless facilities. So at last September's meeting, staff provided an update on our preliminary research on other states' laws. Around that time, there were Tennessee was one of 20 states that had passed small wireless facilities laws, and now there are 28 states. So we will continue our review of other states, and of course, the Federal Communications Commission has also adopted federal rules that govern the deployment of these facilities as well. So we will include that in our report too. But for today, I do want to thank both of our presenters. They have been very helpful for staff in our conversations and for also agreeing to take time to come here today. First, we have Dr. Liang Hong. He's a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Tennessee State University, and he will provide information about small wireless facilities and the evolution of mobile wireless networks. And our second presenter is Dr. Daniel Work. He's an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Vanderbilt University, and he will provide information about the ways in which advances in mobile wireless networks can support advances in the transportation sector. So thank you both, and please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Liang Hong. I'm a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Tennessee State University. First, I would like to thank this great opportunity to share my expertise with my research area in wireless communication. So the title of my presentation is Small Cell Wireless Introduction. So in this presentation, I will provide an overview of small cell wireless communication technology to answer the following 6 questions. So the first is the motivation. Why do we need small cell technology? And then what is small cell technology and how does it look like? After that, I will provide some comparison of the small cell technology with previous generation technologies. Following the benefits of the small cell technology for communities and cities, okay, the status of small cell technology in USA, and also some strategies to update our local codes will be given. So the motivation of using small cell technology is because we are currently entering the 5G era. So in the last 40 years, our mobile system has been evolved from first generation to fifth generation with about 10 years, every 10 years as a generation. So in the first generation mobile system, it can only provide analog voice signal And then in the second generation, it can provide high quality digital voice and a little bit small message signal. And in 3G and 4G, we can have broadband wireless communication. The fifth generation, the mobile system, is to provide a connected world. So this is the vision of the fifth generation wireless system. There are three major user scenarios. The fifth generation wireless system is expected to provide high speed for extreme mobile broadband with larger than 10 gigabits per second at the peak time and 100 megabits every time you need it. So therefore, this vision can provide unlimited experience for broadband, such as a 3D video, ultra high definition, the screens, augmented and virtual reality applications. The second user scenario for 5G application is a massive scale connection for massive machine communication for the future application in Internet of Things. Therefore, we can have application in smart city, smart home, and so on. And the third user scenario is to provide low latency and ultra reliability applications for critical machine communication. So in this area, we can have a self-driving cars, e-health, which is the doctor can provide remote the surgery and so on, and of course, the industrial automations. So the left figure shows those applications for the 5G. So if we compare the 5G application with the 4G, right now currently we are using the LTE, which is a long-term evolution technology. So the 5G can reduce the latency for about 10 times. So, so the delivery latency can be as low as 1 millisecond. And it can provide 10 times higher the connections for the density, for the Internet of Things connection, a lot of connections, 10 times higher the throughputs, and 3 times higher the spectrum efficiency, 100 times traffic capacity and network efficiency. So therefore, in order to implement or achieve these goals, new technologies has to be used. Small cell technology, which is a second circle in this figure, together with a millimeter wave, massive MIMO, and beamforming and full duplex, those 5 technologies, they are the major technologies to achieve the goals for the 5G. So small cell is some portable base station that require minimum power to operate. Typically, the small cell system will have an antenna and some small size, the wireless equipment. So, okay, so therefore, the left picture shows some example for this small cell attached to a light pole. There will be an antenna on top, and the bottom has some wireless equipment needed. And the small cell is used to cover small area with smaller size of the infrastructure. And it is best suited for dense area with high demand for the data communication, such as in the downtown business area, urban residential area, stadium, and mall, and so on. So this is how the small cell technology look like. As I mentioned, small cell infrastructure typically has an antenna and a small wireless equipment. So it can be attached to a street light, the utility poles, or has its own slim line poles and also stand-alone poles, all attached to some public furniture, such as this bus station and so on. So the bottom shows some real small cell infrastructure that already been deployed. So this small cell infrastructure, they will be connected, use fiber optics to the communication hub for high-speed data communication. So comparing to the previous, the cellular or mobile system, basically the 3G, 4G system, so they are based on the macro cell system, which all of us can see this high tower. So when this technology, typically they are used to cover areas span several miles. And the macro cell technology is best for low density population and also best for voice. However, the quality for data is not that good. For small cell, it brings the network closer to the user. So therefore, okay, it can increase the data capacity and provide faster connection speed because we are closer, and of course, the better wireless experience because of less the degradation of the signal propagation. So therefore, a small cell is expected to provide best experience for both voice and data. And typically, small cell only covers a few hundred feet of coverage. So since small cell is best for dense area with high demand, so even in the 5G system, it typically is used as complement for the high tower system. We are still going to see those high towers, but in the dense area, we are going to have a lot of these small cell infrastructures. So the connectivity is very important for the functionality of all the community and the cities. So small cell will provide a better experience in connectivity. So therefore, it will have a lot of benefits to communities. For example, it can improve the economic competitivity of the community, increase the technology and business-friendly reputation, and also provide the more opportunities to implement smart city, intelligent transportation systems, and so on, all of these applications. So therefore, the first benefit is business-friendly. Secondly, okay, with small cell and other 5G technologies, okay, we can have more reliable wireless coverage throughout the community. So therefore, we'll have more convenient day-to-day life and also other social and economic activities. Also, right now, more than 80% of the 911 calls, they are placed on wireless phones. So therefore, okay, the small cell, since it is closer to the user, so therefore, it can provide better access to 911 service and better connected first response to have a safer community. So some research has been conducted to predict that actually the 5G system with small cell as one of the major technology, they are benefit to all the size of the communities, like a small community, Saratoga in California, to Chicago, the metro Chicago. This is a huge metro area for job creation and also GDP growth. So the RVA, a company, has conducted some survey with about 170 76 interviews with cities, service providers, and also city planners. There are just a few statistics I present here to give some overview of the small cell in USA. They have more detailed and complete report for the survey. So currently, about 44% of these 176 communities, they are deploying the small cell infrastructures, and 26% of these communities, they are they are doing consideration of the small cell technologies. So therefore, about 70% overall. And it also found that among the small cell deployed, basically for the large city with more than 500,000 populations, 90% of them already have some small cell infrastructures. And it is more prevalent in this larger community because the advantage for small cell is for dense area with higher demands. And among small cell deployed, half of them have small cell policies complete. And currently, about 37% of the small cell infrastructures, they are attached to telephone or electric poles, and 32% they are attached to street light poles. So therefore, it requires the local government to make certain the policy on the regulations. For small cell, the largest amount of complaint comes from the look or the aesthetics of the deployment. Basically, people doesn't want something looks different from the street pole too close to them. And the second, actually, they found for the small cell complaints are coming from the time required for getting permission. So therefore, this requires local government to do some work to solve this problem. So the National League of Cities has provided some guideline for the strategies that local government can use to update local codes. So basically, it is a 6-step strategy. The first step is to get a full understanding of the small cell technology and also some important safety considerations. The second step is to articulate the local priority for accommodating small cell technology. After that, local government can create clear policy for permit review that let both city staff and also industrial applicants know the expectation. After that, the city can develop a template right-of-way access policy and agreement, as well as a city pole attachment agreement. So once this has been done, we can think through the beneficial items the city could negotiate with industrial in exchange for use of right-of-the-way if it is allowed by state law. Finally, of course, the city need to give careful consideration for fee structure for negotiation with industry. Okay, I think that's all for my presentation, and thank you very much. Any questions?
Mayor, you're recognized.
Dr. Hong, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
One of the things you talked about in there for those of us in local government is the right-of-way issue.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about putting those things on the poles. What you didn't talk about was what has to go in the right-of-way. If they're putting them on existing poles,
Mm-hmm.
it's it's, as you say, it's a matter of whether or not most of us think it's aesthetically pleasing. But what else? You didn't talk about how it gets its power. Is it getting it in the ground, or
Yes.
as we've seen in Cool
Currently,
Springs?
yes.
In Cool Springs, there was one that I just heard about today that had a box at the bottom and a generator strapped to it. That didn't look so aesthetically pleasing, and maybe it's a temporary thing. But if you could talk about what goes in the ground portion of the right-of-way, please.
Yeah, depends on what kind of the small cell infrastructure you are going to implement. So many of them, they are attached to street light, which already have some power close by, which can be used. So basically, yes, there will be some underground the connection for fiber optics, for those data transmission to the communication hub, and also certain the power and other requirements. And also, the second most commonly used the pole is the utility poles, which also has the power ready for those small cell infrastructures.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Yarbrough.
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation. It was very informative. What I'm trying to get at is you have a slide in here that talks about that this is being best for rolling out in dense environments. Help me understand what dense means and where the efficiency loss is there, and is there a small town or rural strategy for deployment where you could have limited, sort of small cell in the industrial or business areas of towns that covers dense areas, or is that not really the way that this gets deployed?
Okay, yes, the dense area, just like this 4 picture shows, the downtown business, stadium, and the residential area. So typically, we can assume each tower can covers about hundreds the users. If it is more than that, okay, like a stadium, you have a huge amount, hundreds of the thousands of peoples, they are trying to use these applications. So therefore, definitely you need. And also for the urban residential area, later on we are going to have smart homes. So in home, you will have a lot of sensors. So therefore, that will be about 10 times or even 100 times more connection comparing to the current system. So therefore, this is what we consider as a dense area. So much more than hundreds of users at the same time need service. Yeah.
Other questions? Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not certain to whom to ask this question, but I've had emails, and I'm skeptical of the content of them. But some constituents candidly ask about the health concerns related to 5G. And I know WHO has said it's not a health concern, but just to get it on the record, do you mind talking about that from a health perspective?
Okay, to be honest, this is not my area. Okay, the doctor need to give this probably some other, the research need to be done to answer this question. Just my personal opinion. Okay, so as a human, basically we are already lived in an environment with these electronic magnetic waves. We have it everywhere, and for the small cell, okay, the advantage is it is closer to the user. So therefore, it requires minimum power, which is actually comparing with those high tower. The power used for this small cell system is much smaller. So therefore, actually, you are receiving less, the radiations or something. Although those radiations impact on human body, we still don't know. Just as you mentioned, the WHO said there's no any impact. but still people are skeptical about this conclusion. It still needs certain time to get that result. And also another thing is for the 5G system with this small cell technology, we are using much higher frequency. So therefore, when the frequency is higher, it's just like it is more and more like the light. So it can be very easily blocked by certain objects. So it is expected that actually the 5G system can be easily blocked by our human skin. So it cannot penetrate. But this is just a few research, and that's my personal opinion. I really don't know the true answer of it. Yeah.
Mayor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try to ask a question on page 5 of your slide. So my question is, in areas that are not being addressed by your population numbers, such as your rural areas that are still not able to receive signals, even for our children doing their homework, as basic as that. So we go from a macro to a small cell. Is there anything from a technology standpoint that's on the horizon that we can get out into our rural parts of our community that the small cell seems to be good for a couple of 100 yards of football field or for density, as you've indicated? But what do we do about those customers, those people out in areas that constantly are calling us? And to address some of the needs the legislators are going to have to deal with is these rural areas. There's no jobs. We're trying to help them. What have we got on the horizon that's coming down the pike that can address some of these needs?
Okay, this is a quite good question.
Well, thank you.
So this, just as I mentioned, the small cell and 5G, in the 5G area, basically, it is the best suited for, the dense area. For rural area, because it has very small amount of user and it's just like provide, customized service to them only. So it depends on the negotiation, I think, between the local government and the industry. So this is beyond my technology part of this research.
So as a follow-up, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
if I could, I appreciate that, and I know you're the messenger in your research and your education, but there are a lot of agriculture people that depend on tractors and equipment and cellular service to farm now.
Yes.
It's not the old days when I was around. It's latitude and longitudes, all based what's coming out of that tractor. And if they can't get that material, that puts us, or they can't get that communication, the technology, that puts us behind on the curveball. So when you're relaying your messages to your people, let them know the rural folks also, even though I come from a very aggressive county that's fast growing, but we still have a lot of technology that's needed out into our agricultural business.
Yes,
It's just a statement, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you. Yes, this 5G one of the important area is also including the future smart agriculture. Yes.
Do I have anyone else? I do. Okay, Mayor Brooks.
Thanks, Chairman. And as a follow-up to my colleague, Mayor Anderson, we all have been receiving emails about the dangers of 5G, and we also have rural areas in our districts and in our cities and counties. I have also been, because of the presence, and Mr. Chairman, I apologize if I'm not supposed to name a provider, but Google has come to Nashville, and there is a Google Loon balloon system that they say will help when areas that cannot be served right now. I have been investigating this process. But even as advanced as that is, they only go up to 4G. And so some of the questions in our rural area is if this 5G versus 4G is illustrated on the slide, would 5G actually not be the proper rural application as it's being talked about? Does it actually defend these emails that we're getting that we shouldn't do this?
Okay, so just like all the previous generation of the wireless system, the deployment of the new generation of the wireless system is gradually deployed. So typically it starts from the large city with a lot of users. This is actually based on the service providers, the thing they will apply for their license and so on. So probably considering their business or economic benefits. So therefore, as we know right now, AT&T, Verizon, they are currently trying to provide 5G service to first 12 metro areas. So therefore, I believe in the future, every 10 years as a generation, probably 5 or 6 years, something like that, it will gradually go to the rural area or something like that. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Sure. Other questions or comments from the members? If I might be able to add one, I have one of the least served districts in Tennessee. And we keep saying it'll be another 3 to 5 years, and it's just not working. We're just not getting there. Our grant funding says it must be an unserved area, which means one home within 100 homes. If one home has it, then they're not subject to grants. And we really have a problem. I have a gentleman in my district moved from Atlanta. He does sales worldwide. He bought a farm up in my area and literally had to rent and a shared office on the electric power board's wireless network or fiber optics network. And he drives in every day at 4 o'clock and downloads his day's work. He has to drive about 18 miles. And coming from Atlanta, he was a little surprised about that. He's now in his 4th year of trying to get something other than dial-up, and he just can't get it. So it's going to be extremely difficult for me to support any kind of improvement in the congested areas when we can't get it in the rural areas. My farmers are constantly complaining about this. We now have drones that can fly over the land, tell them where they need the fertilizer, what their land temperature is. Yes. And they go together and buy these drones. But if they don't have wireless connectivity, the drone can't speak to them. So I don't understand why we're punishing rural Tennessee. I just don't get that. So it's going to be hard to get me to want to put one on every light pole downtown when the people up in my district are using homing pigeons. So it's going to be a little difficult to talk me over. I don't care if it scrambles your brain or not. I'm more looking at getting it and then worrying if it's hurting us.
Yeah,
So
I agree with this. Yeah, so seems like right now we are having something we call the digital divide. Some areas we're having better and better service, but some area may not have any improvement. So yes, it requires, of course, the local government and also those service provider to work together
sure.
to provide that.
Yeah, it's very frustrating and very difficult to explain.
Yes.
When you go to Byrdstown, Tennessee, a very rural district, and they have gigabyte service, fiber optics, and you go 2 miles or 4 miles from my home and you have dial-up. And the home is $500,000 or $600,000 and $2 or $3 million farm, and they have dial-up. So it's extremely difficult to explain that. In fact, impossible. I'm worn out with it, and everyone that lives in that area is. So I was hoping that this 5G would end up on each telephone pole going up the valley and that would provide. But you're saying that's just not in the cards.
It is, currently my research work is in this massive MIMO and beamforming. So just like this figure shows, right now the proposed solution to connect these small cells are using this fiber optics, which cost is very high. So, so our research is trying to provide a wireless connection. So therefore, instead of you put those fiber optics, which is very expensive to connect to, even 2 miles or 4 miles. So if we can have a wireless with this massive MIMO and beamforming technology to cover that, so therefore, hopefully it can reduce the cost. Then it can make the deployment much easier. Yeah, but as I mentioned, this is also our research work. One of my research is using the massive MIMO and beamforming to provide the connection for these small cell infrastructures.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Well, Dr. Hong, thank you.
Thank you
Very
very much.
informative. We appreciate your time and effort in assisting us.
It's my
Any
pleasure.
other
Thank you.
questions before we let him sit back down? All right, next, Dr. Work. You're welcome to sit there or go to the podium, whichever you prefer to do. Thank you for your time and preparing and being here today. We look forward to your presentation.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present in front of the Commission. My name is Dan Work. I'm a professor at Vanderbilt University. I work in the area of transportation engineering, and with the few minutes I have, I'd like to give some examples of how transportation systems are changing and how important connectivity and, in particular, 5G technologies may be to the future of transportation. And so the title of what I present today is called Moving People, Goods, and Bits, and that's really to emphasize the transition that is happening in our transportation networks from historically moving people, us, around, and moving the goods that we desire around, to doing that increasingly with technology, using digital bits to achieve high-efficiency transportation systems. So the context really that we sit in today is this transition where transportation systems are becoming digitized. That really links together the people, the vehicles, the road infrastructure with sort of the internet technologies that involve like the sensors and the communication networks that allow sort of these systems to adapt to their environments and really work well together. Some examples of what these systems look like include phone-based digital transformation that is happening in the transportation network. We all have kind of taken for granted that we can call up on our phones using our favorite mapping service how to get to basically anywhere on Earth, and we can get an estimate of how long that's going to take. And we kind of forget sort of like it was totally hard to predict when we were using maps that we would print off of the internet or ones that we bought in books that like that was coming and it was going to be, something that you'd run into people and they wouldn't know how to navigate without a phone that had connectivity. So we're able to now crowdsource traffic. We take the GPS data as it's telling you where you are and where to turn next. It's measuring your speed. It blends it with all the other drivers that are also using those services to give you really, really accurate traffic maps. And that's something that's happened in the last decade. It happened because the phone is so easy to deploy, right? We have phones that last on the order of 2 years, which meant that we could go with these jumps in connectivity to faster phones, better capabilities, more sensors, high throughput, without having to change anything about the vehicles that we drive. Right? The next move is really to make the vehicles themselves smarter, to get them connected, to get them equipped with more sensors. The car has an incredible power source. It doesn't run out at the end of the day. So you can afford to run more expensive sensors, more high-intensity computing. And the sort of model that people are using is, well, can we take our feet off the gas and brake? Can we take our hands off the steering wheel and eventually our brain off the driving task? That is what the Society of Automotive Engineers designates a level 5 vehicle, where you can't intervene with the car even if you want to because there are no steering wheel, no gas pedal, whatever. Now that hype has really gotten a lot of attention that it's going to be here in the tomorrow, next day, whatever. I think you can find ads from articles from as early as like 1930-ish saying that the fully automated roadways will be here in a few years. So I put the plus 5 years here to designate that we're solving really hard problems, but they do take time. The sort of slowest evolution is really the infrastructure-based transportation systems, because we put things out, we build these large networks, and we expect them to persist for 20, 50, 100 years if it's the case of a bridge. Now, when you try to put the internet into those types of systems, like put sensors on bridges to monitor them in real time, allow the cars to talk with the traffic signal so that they can speed up or slow down and optimize their efficiency to not race to the traffic light only to find it immediately as it changes to red and then have to wait. You can slow the car down in advance and save a little bit of fuel as you go there. That can only happen once you sort of connect the traffic signals with the vehicles themselves. And that just takes more time, because you've got to go out to every intersection that you want to put these technologies in and actually deploy the capabilities to connect them. I thought if you want to understand a little bit about what's happening in the transportation system, the research community has designated right now as the period of the 3 revolutions in transportation. It's rare to have one revolution happening at a given time, but there are 3 major trends that are happening in mobility that are worth paying attention to. That is electrifying the vehicle fleet. That is automating the vehicle fleet. And that is this notion of sharing, which exemplars would be companies like Uber or Lyft, or depends on if you're a fan or not of the micromobility, the scooters that you see. You don't own those things, you share them, right? All of those things depend on connectivity. Even your electric vehicle, if you've got only a limited number of charging stations, you might want to know if that charging station has a spot available before you drive over there and find that it's currently occupied. These revolutions have multi-billion-dollar industries linked around sort of their intersection. So just as an example, there are companies like Tesla that are working on this automation and electrification of the cars together to try to tackle some of the mobility challenges. There are companies that have postulated that the right way to look at urban mobility in the future is to completely electrify the vehicle fleet, completely share it so that users don't own their cars any longer, and run effectively a fleet of robo-taxis around. That won't work if the people and the cars and the infrastructure are not connected together. Okay? So these types of revolutions depend on connectivity. I wanted to share a little bit of videos to kind of give you an illustration of why connectivity is so important. This was an experiment that was really launched by the Federal Highway Administration in the 90s, developing core technologies that allow these cars to talk together to drive much closer than what humans would ever be able to do. We call these vehicular platoons, and what they're able to do by driving at very high speeds and very close together is have significantly higher throughput than what human drivers can achieve on a roadway. Why that became so compelling is it became possible to use technology, communication, moving bits around to effectively double or triple the capacity of that lane of roadway. Okay? Why didn't that happen? It's in the 90s. This was a research project. It didn't happen because the type of connectivity that was required to link those cars together had no way to easily deploy. Right? There needs to be something else to piggyback on, like, for example, 5G technologies that might also work on our phones, so that the cars can get this type of connectivity almost for free. You still have to pay for the devices, but the network becomes a driver for other services beyond just making sure that these cars can drive close together. Connectivity still has been materialized right now. There's a very aggressive push to network trucks together. It's a technology called truck platooning. This is a video from a trucking company in Skåne. We have a collaboration with KTH. It's a university in Sweden that develops a lot of the control and communication technologies that achieve this. Those trucks are constantly communicating back and forth. You don't have to wait to see the brake lights to know the truck is slowing down. You're constantly receiving that information from the vehicle ahead of you through wireless technology, so that you can, again, achieve these really small separations even at high speeds, which reduces the aerodynamic drag on the second and third trucks, increasing their fuel efficiency. So there's an actual huge push to save truck drivers money here by networking those trucks together and allowing them to achieve fuel efficiencies on long-haul trucks. Well, today's vehicles are also currently automated, just very low-level automation. So we talk about level 5 automation being hands-off, brain-off driving. Level 1 automation are things like adaptive cruise control. It's a regular cruise control, but if the car in front of you slows down, the cruise controller will also slow you down because it's constantly got a sensor that measures the distance and speed of the vehicle ahead. This is an experiment we ran last year with all commercial vehicles. They are just running adaptive cruise control. There is no communication between them. We slow down the first vehicle. It's currently traveling at 50 miles an hour. We slow it down by 6 miles an hour and then hold it at 44 miles per hour. And we watch what happens to these cars, which are only using the sensors to estimate what's happening ahead. They don't have any connectivity. And you can see sort of as you go back in the vehicular platoon, the cars have to react, because they only have to measure that the car ahead is slowing down. They're not receiving it continuously through wireless. They have to brake harder to avoid a collision than the car in front of them did. And that causes the cars to slow down so much that this last car actually disengaged the adaptive cruise control system. It has a minimum speed that it must operate above, and if you go below that speed, it hands back control to humans. So I want to give a compliment for the videos you see with the truck platooning and these vehicular cars that are driving very, very slow. The connectivity is what allows them to achieve that high throughput. Today's vehicular automation systems that you can buy today have many benefits, but because they don't have that connectivity, they cannot anticipate what's happening beyond one car in front of them, and so they have to respond. That creates what we call phantom traffic jams. These phantom traffic jams are the same type of jams that human drivers create when we're not paying attention, when we don't look ahead or we don't have an ability to see beyond, like, say, a truck that's immediately in front of us. So connectivity is a key here. And I thought I'd just kind of conclude with a few more thoughts about how this evolution of cell phone technologies has kind of mapped into the transportation space. We had 2G networks, and if you wanted to understand how that impacted traffic, you dialed 511 and you got your latest traffic conditions, pressing numbers until your roadway came up, right? The 3G networks really gave the birth of the so-called Google Maps or Apple Maps or Waze or all these different example services where you could get crowdsourced traffic information because the phones had enough bandwidth to be able to share the GPS data that they had on them with the servers, blend it all together with everybody else's data, and then feed it back to your phone seamlessly to get good estimates of what the traffic conditions looked like. Well, the 4G networks really gave rise to things like Uber and Lyft and these car sharing systems where they're constantly downloading all kinds of information about the map, the environment that you're in, what the drivers are doing, and so on. It allows you to put Netflix in your car and leave your kids watching videos while you drive on road trips. That's possible through those high bandwidth networks. But as we move to 5G networks, we really open the possibility of having just a completely different degree of high throughput, low latency communication that can offer all kinds of new opportunities in next generation safety. The cars can communicate in ways that might be outside the field of view of the driver or outside the field of view of the sensors. I can see on a blind spot if my cars are talking to each other at an intersection. They can know that a collision is going to occur and then automate those vehicles in small ways so that the collisions do not happen. Okay, and certainly if you can know through communication rather than having to measure with sensors, you have a lot higher reliability in terms of taking an evasive action for those vehicles. Next generation traffic management, those cars, if they connect together, can actually be used to control the overall traffic flow. So instead of having extreme congestion waves that are propagating, you might be able to slow cars down using cars that can measure what's going on and actuate them so that you don't have high-speed rear-end collisions on freeways any longer. There are companies that are thinking about even today, many of the self-driving car companies that promise that you can turn your eyes off and your brain off of the driving task, they still have communication that pulls a tremendous amount of data from that vehicle in real time back to their servers. And still, because they can't pull all the data off the cars in real time, they have to drive it back into the garage at night and backhaul many of the data that they need to learn what did the car do well and what did the car not do well. Higher bandwidth connectivity allows the possibility of doing that stuff continuously as it operates. There are even people that are thinking about, well, in the case of trucking, let's say, rather than having a truck driver in the truck, what if I had a truck driver in effectively an office, and they can basically manage multiple trucks at the same time? And if something is happening, maybe we'll just pull up the video screen from that truck and kind of put them in the virtual truck so that they can take over control of that vehicle. That's a dream. We're not there yet, but we cannot achieve those types of technologies if we don't have very low latency, very high bandwidth, very high reliability connectivity. That's something that, as the 5G networks are evolving, a lot of people are interested in trying to pull those types of technologies in. So mobility services at the edge, what I really mean there is that if you talk to many of the big technology companies, they're really pushing hard on this idea of that for safety critical services, you cannot, like for example, if you're going to try to control a vehicle to avoid collisions, you cannot right now send that data over a 4G network, put it on the cloud, have a bunch of computers and a server somewhere decide when they're going to compute on that, and then try to send it all the way back, because if you miss the data, you've got a safety concern. So you're pushing the computing as much as you possibly can, either to the edge of the freeway or into the vehicle itself, so that you don't have to do these really long hops back to the server and then back to the car to make decisions. The new business models for insurance, fleet management, these cars now pull tremendous volumes of data. Even commercial cars that now are equipped with radar sensors and all the CAN bus messages that it's basically a communication backbone that sits inside of the car that usually does things like speeds up and slows down your windows or turns your windshield wipers on. It's all done over an electronic communication network. Well, you might want to, I mean, I've seen examples of people that are trying to estimate high reliability weather maps using notions of whether or not the windshield wipers are on the car or not. It's a pretty good sign if your windshield wipers are on that it's raining. And so if you can tell from the cars, using them as sensors and being able to share information about what those cars are collecting with everybody else, we might not just be able to put traffic on the maps, but all kinds of other high fidelity information that we want about the environment in which those cars operate and share that with other users. So the main take-home message, and I'll wrap up on that, is that the future transportation systems are depending on the communication networks just as much as they are on the actual road networks themselves. And there's a lot of potential promise of these 5G technologies that will unlock a lot of the things that we've been thinking about for a while, but we haven't had a mechanism or a technique to piggyback on to a widely deployed high-throughput communication network that is promised in 5G. So I'll stop there. Thank you for your time.
All right, questions or comments? Mayor? McDonald?
In your research, Dr. Work, have you found any appetite from the Federal Highway to deploy this on the interstate systems in some fashion in the future? Is there any movement in that direction?
Yeah, I won't speak for the Federal Highway Administration specifically, but I can say from the research community that is funded by a number of agencies, including FHWA, there was a lot of interest in taking advantage of the fact that cars are becoming increasingly automated and that we might be able to network them together to improve throughput, improve safety, improve fuel efficiency of all of our roadways.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? All right. Dr. Lepard?
So what does the transition look like, even after the technology is available, the backbone's in place? I mean, it's going to take a while for people to give up older vehicles, so when you have that mixture of new technology cars and still a lot of old technology, how long does it take to kind of work through?
That's an excellent question. The prediction of the technology sort of penetration rates is always a very tricky one, especially when you, as you correctly pointed out, I personally drive a vehicle which is now 15 years old, right? And no matter what happens in the network around it, it's still going to be a 15-year-old car that doesn't have any of the latest technologies. Depending on how important it is, you can imagine, or how valuable it is to me as a driver, I might be able to upgrade certain components in my vehicle to add connectivity, but it won't be the same as a car that rolls off the lot in 2019 that has all kinds of computing already embedded in, all kinds of different sensors, ability to actuate those vehicles. There is a perspective, I'm not sure I agree with it or not, but I think it's at least thought-provoking, that says, well, if you take the fully automated and fully connected transportation network that many companies are trying to do, right, that you could have a transition that looks a lot more like a cell phone than a current vehicle. And the mapping that you have to kind of think through is to say that, well, like our personal vehicles, we might drive them 10,000 miles a year, right? But if they are roving around constantly serving rides all over the place, long haul, short haul, it doesn't matter, those vehicles could easily rack up 100,000 miles a year. And so the notion that they may not be functionally obsolete, but they've run 100,000 miles already, or 200,000 miles in a 2-year period, you might need to take that back in and completely retrofit the car or replace parts or basically pull it out of service and put something new in service. And it starts to look a whole lot more like a cell phone. And so the transition could be extremely rapid and not look like the previous transitions on the vehicles. I don't know that I necessarily subscribe to that view, but I think it is worth kind of keeping as a perspective, as an alternative to there will never be these technologies at scale.
Got some really good jokes up here. I'm hoping that you all aren't listening, but they're quite comical. Other questions or comments? Anyone? Yes, Senator Yarborough.
I mean, sort of building on some of the things we've been talking about, obviously you can't deploy this technology everywhere. And so you're going to have some places where you'll have these massively interconnected data streams. And how do you plan for the places where they transition, where you're really running, all out of that space?
Yeah.
I mean, are there things that we should be thinking about from a setting up a regulatory framework or growth strategy to think about, like, what's the smart way to approach that kind of issue?
Yeah, so the question still becomes, no matter how this thing happens, even if it's a jump transition, which may not be, there's always going to be this sort of mixed environment where you have cars like mine mixing with cars that might have all kinds of additional capabilities, connectivity, and automation. And so from the research community, I can say that what has occurred is a transition from kind of that 1990s video I showed you, where you noticed it was on it was on a closed-off section of roadway. Those cars were all running identical vehicles. They all had the same communication protocols. They all had the same technologies built into them, to the real world where things are heterogeneous. And so the research community has taken a completely different angle on that now and said, well, let's look at what happens when you have one car that has this type of feature. Can you make a compelling example for that? And what happens if you have a few? And what happens if you get to a few % of the vehicles that have these capabilities? We will design these vehicles and these systems such that they can continue to interact with humans without necessarily the more you have, sort of the better the performance of the system should be. And one example that we are currently working on in my own research group in collaboration with many others across the country is looking at how you can take these very low-level automation, not the full-blown level 5 vehicles, with minimal connectivity, even at modest penetration rates, say 5% of the vehicles that have these, and still get benefits in terms of smoothing out traffic jams, improving the fuel consumption of all the vehicles in the fleet. So I think there's a lot of opportunity space in those low market penetration rates, transition periods, where we can still achieve positive benefits to not only the vehicles that have those capabilities, but the vehicles that are in the environment around them.
Mayor Anderson?
I'm simply amazed at how far we've come since the days of the party line when I was a boy and what you can do. But my question is for our communities, and you're in transportation, kind of take me down the path what I can expect in our ambulances and healthcare in the field of transportation, and how that's going to better serve our community from a healthcare perspective in our different communities, particularly in our ambulances and probably even the helicopter world.
Yeah, I'll give a perspective on what that could look like. So in terms of, the idea at a high level is if you can connect your ambulances to the infrastructure into hospitals, certainly you can do more than we can do today when those are not connected. What's an example? Well, if I network the ambulance with the traffic signal, then I can do things like preemptively make sure that the right-of-way is clear for that vehicle as it's moving forward, right? And I might even be able to take that ambulance and connect to other vehicles. So if I'm in an environment where there isn't a traffic signal nearby, I can still start using those vehicles with information that I can directly transmit to them to start parting sort of a space for an ambulance to pass through. As you start thinking about the high throughput connectivity, I can start connecting data that I might be collecting from a patient in the ambulance to the hospital so that as soon as they arrive, we already know the best knowledge we can possibly have in terms of what we've already measured about this person, what type of data and diagnostics we've already collected, so that when they hit the ground in the emergency room, we can immediately start taking care of those patients. So I know that there's another big push that I've only seen sort of as a transportation expert in a community of people that are widely interested in connectivity. There is a big push in rural health that if you have the possibility of telemedicine, where you might actually be able to keep a doctor in one spot. I guess the model, let me say, is that moving a highly skilled doctor around where they spend most of their time in the vehicle is probably not nearly as efficient as being able to connect that highly skilled doctor to a lot of patients where you're switching effectively between a digital call or digital connectivity. So that sort of notion of it's very inefficient to take a doctor and make them a driver. If we can instead keep them fixed, and instead of having the patients come to them, actually let the patients and the doctors still connect, but not having to physically move, that opens a nice possibility of being much more efficient in terms of how you serve rural communities with healthcare.
Senator Lombard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dan, this might be for you or Dr. Hong. And The question, in preface this, because it's very important for Tennessee, what we're talking about, because we are manufacturing more automobiles than Detroit is right now. And the question is kind of open-ended. It's where are we from a regulatory and policy standpoint in Tennessee? Are we ahead of the curve? Do you see changes that need to be made to allow the deployment further? Are we in the middle of the pack? Where are we in that framework?
Maybe I'll start and then I'll defer to my colleague for further comments. So I can say that one of the reasons, I'm a relatively new resident of the state of Tennessee. I moved here about 1.5 years ago. One of the reasons I came was for the climate in terms of transportation. There is a huge automobile presence, automobile manufacturing presence. We have companies that are involved in mobility at all scales and all sizes globally in Tennessee. And recently, there has been a new organization that was created in the state of Tennessee called TenSmart, which is a consortium of the research universities, of the national laboratories like Oak Ridge National Lab, the Tennessee Department of Transportation, local communities that are all interested in mobility and having that dialogue to understand exactly how we can work together to put Tennessee at the forefront of this next revolution in transportation, making sure that we're taking advantage of the unique culture that we have here. I'm not sure exactly where the regulatory space sits with respect to the small cell wireless, but I'll maybe defer to my colleague to give further comment on that front.
Yeah, I think I got similar information. I also attend a meeting from the TenSmart like meetings, and there are a lot of talk and about the regulations. As I know, the FedEx already started.
Dr. Hung, if I could, just so that you're on the record, do you mind going to the microphone? Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Also, the same. I attend a couple of TenSmart that meeting, and from those meetings, I also got some information about these transportation areas. As I know, but I'm not exactly sure. I think FedEx already started working with the local government for this truck polluting the operations, and they also start to train the police officer, because according to Tennessee's policy, trucks need to have at least 200 feet the distance between them. If we use these pollutants, they can be much shorter. So therefore, if that's the case, the police officer need to be trained. Don't give them ticket or something. I think they already started some work on this, but I'm not exactly sure what is the current status, because we are basically from the research community for those technologies.
Follow-up, Senator Lamar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And not really a follow-up to either of you, but I guess to staff. It's one I would like to see, because this really is critical for Tennessee, and to know where we are policy-wise and the regulatory environment in which we're charged with. What can we do, frankly, to stay ahead of the curve of not only where we are, but where we're going, so that we can set this up. Because I'm glad, Don, that you came here, and welcome home, by the way. But I also want to make certain that for the foreseeable future, we are way ahead of the curve. I do not want to be, frankly, in the middle of the pack. I don't want to be in the top 10. I want to be number one by a long way in Tennessee. Thank you.
All right. Other questions or comments? Just for the edification of the committee, this is a fact-finding day. This report is actually due August of 2020, so if you have suggestions or thoughts that you'd like to add to it, today is a great day to do so. As I will drive home today, Waze will tell me whether to get off at Grandview or to go on through Chattanooga and other ways, because it's so difficult at times. My trips have gone from 2 hours and 8 minutes to 4 hours and 47 minutes to drive home, and that's quite a bit of difference. So I've learned to rely on Waze to send me in different ways. No pun intended. I am interested. I was so concerned that the 5G rollout has not helped my district because there's just no fiber optics and the homes are too far apart, and it seems like 5G is nothing more than it's not going to be helpful to me. So I was very interested, Dr. Work, on if I can't get it 4 miles from my house, how in the world am I going to drive from Chattanooga to Mont Eagle and go through those areas? If we're going to have 5G up Mont Eagle Mountain and through Manchester and Winchester and all other places, why in the world, how are we going to have it, not have it at Birchwood and Snow Hill? And so I'm just interested in those concepts. I mean, I love the concept of the trucks. I have 2 of the largest trucking companies in the world in my district, and I'm sure they would be interested in that. But I just don't know. I'm confused. Dr. Hong has left me with the impression that it's virtually inapplicable in my district, and Dr. Werg has convinced me that it's going to be all over every interstate highway. And so I'm a little confused. Is there some vision to bring that back together for me?
I mean, that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question and right on the core of the challenge, right? That we're working on developing technologies that we think can have huge benefit to society, but it has to be deployed for all members of society. It doesn't work if it's underserving the state of Tennessee if it's only in a subset of the regions in the state. It needs to be available for all.
Perhaps this is a good time to go public and put my wife's stake in the ground. I used to race cars and had a big truck that I drove around, and she never liked it. And she said it was way too big and it cost way too much to operate, and that she was going to develop a plan to reduce every 1 to 12 inches in size. And so a plane would carry 3,500 people, a home would house 500 people, and we wouldn't ruin the earth and we wouldn't do all these things. She hasn't worked on that lately. I'll get her back on it, but it sounds like that may be something that we can do along with all this. Just for any future patenting process, I want to make that public statement. Any other questions or comments? Gentlemen, just extremely interesting, and my mind has just been spinning. If we have enough connectivity, literally we can move into the 21st century in ways that are just amazing. So I'm interested in how we're going to develop that connectivity and how can it be done cheaper and quicker and easier, because my district wants it and needs it, and they're interested. So thank you so much for these wonderful presentations and all the thought that's gone into them. Any other questions or comments before we, yes, sir.
Jeff?
Just kind of want to address, Chairman, where, one of the problems you're dealing with is in the rural areas. And I feel like in the last year or a couple of years, we've given a lot of benefits to the cell companies with the use of right-of-ways. And I wonder if we ought to look at, if you're going to deploy a certain number in the denser areas and the urban areas, that they should have to deploy a certain number in those rural areas. Anyway, that's just
it's a great idea. We should pass a law like that.
we should try.
Yeah, we should try. The gentleman sitting to my right has spent a great deal of his legislative career trying to accomplish that, and his wounds and scars have healed fairly nicely. So we appreciate that. There's a lot going on, and it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. We have certainly tried, and we'll continue to do so. I find it interesting that I live 6.8 miles from the Capitol, and without internet, I have no cell phone service. So I had to have the internet installed so I could run wireless so that my cell phone will work where I live. So there are pockets of non-service even in great cities like Nashville. Yes, sir. Senator Lundberg.
Mr. Chairman, question for you. And I guess, are we creating an urban and rural dichotomy when we talk about transportation? And I say that where we'll have this technology that goes down 65 or 40 or 81, 26, whatever, but to get off the exit, that does not exist. That becomes the rural portion of everything. And as this goes on, it slowly deploys so that it can get out to Ottawa or anywhere else.
I just assumed it would start in Ottawa. Maybe I was wrong in that. Would either one of you doctors like to address that issue for us, please?
Yeah.
Oh, come on, that was bordering on slanderous. Clearly out of order and offensive.
I withdraw the statement.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one comment. Just like one slide I showed, actually 5G is expected to provide benefit for any size of the community, not just the urban area, or of course also for the rural area expected. But just like a highway system, when we start, okay, it starts from very small, very limited number of cities. Just like when we start 5G, we start from limited areas. But later on, because 5G, the goal is to have a connected world. So therefore, I believe it will definitely, just like a highway system, to have this everywhere, including both urban and rural area connected. So I think as a communication system, it is infrastructure. So it cannot be deployed in one day or something like that. So it has to be deployed gradually, and hopefully it can, just like highway system, U.S. highway system provide a huge benefit to the economy and everything. So the 5G is just like we have a better highway system to the communication and other applications.
Yes, sir. Mayor Bickers?
I'm maybe this would be something we can look at as part of this study. I know in my community, we've got 5G rollout occurring. I mean, we're dealing with the traffic control and the right-of-way issues as they're deploying it and getting the cable deployed. And it appears that that is a cornerstone or a foundational occurrence for us to have the 5G that you're talking about with our vehicles and even the small cell. Do we know where we stand in the state with how much 5G rollout has occurred and what we're expecting over the next 2 or 3 years? In other words, can we see, as we decide this, knowing 5G is a fundamental, is a requirement, do we know where we stand and where we will be in 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road with regard to 5G?
I think that's a great question for the providers of those networks to maybe engage with, to kind of understand what exactly their deployment plans look like.
That's my interest. Perhaps we can ask the staff to include that at our next meeting.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful for everybody
very
to
much.
see exactly where we are.
Very much so. Yeah. Mayor Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. And I would like to just ask also Dr. Owen and the staff, when we begin preparing this final report, my colleague, Mayor Anderson, mentioned education, and we have just implemented in our city a Wi-Fi task force, and we're shocked to find out that 47% of our city school children, not the county children, the city schools, 47% do not have access to the internet in their home. How in the world they can do their homework, how in the world they can accomplish the goals that the state has set for education, I'm still not sure how that's happening, except I've been told parents are taking their kids to Starbucks.
That's right.
To download their syllabus, to check their homework, McDonald's. So I would love, we have transportation, we have urban, I would love an education component, because I think that's a really strong topic of discussion. Thank you.
Mayor Brooks, I own a business that's right at the 1 mile from the end of fiber optics going north there in Ottawa. And I have a physician whose daughters are in an advanced program, and they drive down to our parking lot at night. And my son set up our wireless, which is 100 up and down or whatever, electric power boards, fiber optics, and set up a special code for them so they can drive into our parking lot where the police now frequently pull in and park beside them and do their reports and things. And these two young ladies can do their homework there. They live in a beautiful home, very expensive, and live about 5 miles from there and have zero internet service. I just find that stunning. It's amazing. They go to a school where there's science, they study science at Stanford University in California because it's linked through the electric power board's fiber optics, and the professor in California teaches these young ladies each morning. And so I just find amazing and limitless what we could do if we just get off our tushes and end some of these anti-competitive rules and allow it to occur. But anyway, that's just me. Representative Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to echo the sentiments of Mayor Brooks, and I think oftentimes as we talk about urban issues, the issue of connectivity is something that surprises people. You talk about pockets in Nashville where low-income students do not have access to the internet in their homes. And as much as internet providers have made the efforts to try to alleviate that gap, you still have these issues where there's no connectivity. And this causes the divide between achievement to continue to grow. And it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in Nashville that you still have some children in metropolitan Nashville public school system who do not have access to the internet in their homes. And this is maybe it's not a connectivity issue as much as a financing issue, but I think it's something that's worth addressing and trying to figure out how then can we get to the place where this becomes something that we don't discuss the next year. Now, one of our former colleagues, it was Joe Armstrong, passed legislation a couple of years back, which asked for a study because there were kids in Knoxville who were having to go to McDonald's to do their homework. And so we want to raise that issue and say that at some point in time, as much as this state grows, and for me personally, there's a gentleman who doesn't get much credit for his involvement in 3G and 4G technology, but is a graduate of Tennessee State University, Jesse Russell, who lived near Fisk University and worked for AT&T Bell Labs and helped design 3G and 4G technology and holds the patents on some of those technologies and holds the patents on cell tower technology. So when we're talking about being an innovator, Tennessee has led the way. And so I just hope that we would take these things into consideration and try to get this lack of access in our urban schools and urban districts done away with when we get a chance. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Waters.
Just to comment, the providers are very critical in what is going to happen. And I remember years ago when we started the cable system and local governments had something to do with it. We took proposals from a lot of companies and we chose a company that said we're going to provide cable to all the areas that has 7 homes per mile. And then once we do that, we're going to gradually provide cable to all the homes, no matter how many homes per mile. But that didn't happen. And we brought them back in and said, you've stopped providing cable. And they said, well, it's not economically feasible for us to do that right now. And so we were stuck. I mean, we, a lot of areas called and said, well, we want cable, but the cable company said it's not economically feasible. So we need to be very much aware and look at it very realistically on these providers, what they're going to be able to do, especially in our rural communities. And I don't know how we help them provide this out there because they're going to say it's not economically feasible for us to go into these areas. That's what they're saying right now. Mm-hmm. And how we do that is, I think, a challenge for all of us and maybe something we need to look at in this study. Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. I regret that Mayor McDonald had stepped out. He and I have had this conversation many times. At one time, the locals decided how to grant, and then the legislature, in its infinite wisdom at that time, removed that from the locals and removed that requirement. I was in the Hamilton County Commission room, I want to say in 1981, when the original contract with Chattanooga Cable TV was let. And that's what they said. You better base your rates on providing every home in the county with it. And that was done. And a few years later, 2 or 3 years later, the state changed it, and they didn't have to do it, and it's still not done today. But their rates were not reduced. So that's a real problem, and the mayor has talked to me about that, and as always, or as almost always, he is correct yet again. Dr. Lippard?
I just wanted to add, there were several topics that have been brought up today, that things that members would like to have included in this study, and I just want to say the good news is that in addition to this study not being due, actually we're bringing you a draft in by August 2020, and then the final report at the next commission meeting. But in addition to this report, we've also been tasked by the General Assembly through the Broadband Act that passed in 2017 to come back to the General Assembly in January of 2021 with an update on access and availability and the effect that the programs that have been put into place as a result of that act have had. So all of these topics will be worked into one or more likely both of these reports, and we're going to have a number of other panels and hear from other technical and policy experts between now and the completion of those two reports. So we'll be able to work all of these topics in.
Well, let's be careful with the dates. Our county court clerk, Gary Baylor, that lives in an unserved area, if he hears 2021 for the report, he may be in suicide watch for the next few days. I have bought him several rolls of stamps and introduced him to the concept of the U.S. mail, and he is not happy, and I don't blame him. He is a great guy. He has so modernized our clerk's office. He's won awards all over America, yet when he goes home, he has dial-up service. And it's just a little bit frightening. So, Gary, I haven't forgotten you. I just haven't gotten you any good done yet. Other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
One quick comment, Chairman. Our county in Tipton County, we definitely have a problem there as well. I live in a small community about 5 minutes out of town from Covington, and Senator Rose lives across the street from me, and Representative Moody, a few houses down. We do not have internet in our area, so it's truly a problem. Yeah, I think we did that. And we definitely need to address it as soon as possible. Thank you.
One of the first things I heard when we came up here at the inauguration and speaking with the governor, that once the election returns were in, President Trump wanted to call him and congratulate him, but discovered that he did not have cell phone service, and so they had to lure him off his farm to a hill where he would have cell service without tipping off that the president was going to call. And they got there, and the phone rang, and the guy said, "This is President Trump," and I just wanted to call him. He thought it was a joke, but they just had to drag him to a location where he had cell service. That's the governor of the state of Tennessee. I know he's truly dedicated to ending the rural-urban divide in Tennessee, and so I think we have a great governor who certainly understands that and will understand your concepts and issues. Other questions or comments? What a tremendously interesting presentation. I think you can see by the questions there's a lot of interest in this, and there is an enormous frustration in the state that we've got to get something done. When you go to Twin Lakes telephone company up in Scott County and find out that they have some of the fastest internet, most reliable internet in the world, better than California, I just don't understand why we can't get it at Snow Hill. So anyway, we're working on that, and I guess we'll continue to work. But I hope these reports will examine a lot of these areas. Any other questions or comments? Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you've done here today. It's been most informative and very appreciated. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Owen, do you want to wrap that up?
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Commission. And I think I'll echo what Dr. Lippard said, that we do have our two reports that will be running concurrently. That is the update to the Commission's initial broadband report, and that's directed by the Broadband Accessibility Act of 2017. And then we'll also have the small cell report that our presentations were on today. And so we want to make sure that there's certainly going to be overlap, as you all well know, in the issues and topics that are discussed in those reports, and so that we want to make sure we are inclusive and are bringing those issues to the fore. And so we will plan on having more presenters, bringing in representatives for providers, representatives for local governments, and as well as issues related to education and making sure access and broadband adoption are covered as well.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is TACIR at its finest. That's what we need to be doing. So I'm very proud of that, and the staff did a great job, Dr. Owen. Next, anything else on that? All right, if you'll look at tab 8, we're back to the final report now. We've discussed this many times. Dr. Owen, that's you again. Oh, did I miss one? Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, tires, equally problematic. Senate Joint Resolution 344, illegal tire dumps. Yeah, Bob, there he is, right in front of me. Presented by Bob Morio, our Senior Research Associate. And we have a panel of several people here today, do we not? Yes, sir. Do you want to go ahead and bring them up? You want to bring them up one at a time? What do you want to do? All right. Let's see, Mike Stooksbury, Dr. Mankeo of the Health Department. I guess that's right, Department of Health. Jeremy Hooper, Dewey Grantham. If you folks would like to come up, let's find you a place, and we'll let you go one at a time and then have a question and answer period later. Mr. Morio, you want to start us off?
Sure, thank you. Just before I introduce you, lest anyone question the dedication of the staff, I went and got myself a flat tire last night.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and do some personal research later today and this weekend at my local tire repair shop. I promise not to dump any tires in the woods. But yeah, as you mentioned, we have. I was going to just kind of run through in alphabetical order if you want to go through. Dewey Grantham from Regional Vice President of Liberty Tire Recycling, leading scrap tire recycling company.
Welcome.
Talk about recycled tire products, the process of recycling tires, and their company's business with the state of Tennessee. You want to go ahead and start us off, if that's...
Hello. My name is Dewey Grantham. I'm with Liberty Tire Recycling. So I oversee the tire recycling that we do in Tennessee, Georgia, Mississippi, and Kentucky. So I've been involved with the program for about 18 and a half years now, and I'm based in Atlanta. So, I'll tell you a little bit about Liberty. Liberty is the largest tire recycler in North America with 1,500 employees at 30 facilities between the U.S. and Canada. And that really gives us the opportunity to service, multiple areas, especially a state like Tennessee that's very spread out, which, we utilize 5 different facilities to service all of Tennessee. Liberty also collects about 150 million tires annually and produces a variety of products like tire-derived fuel, rubber mulch, crumb rubber for athletic fields, scrap wire. One of the things that's really complicated about the tire recycling industry is the fact that, we're running multiple businesses under one umbrella. So we run a transportation company on the front where we're going out and collecting tires, and then we run a manufacturing company where we actually recycle the tires. And then we take that product and paint and package and market that product. So it's a very complex business model and one that we have to manage carefully to maintain profitability. So, you know, I'm very sensitive to the state's needs, and it was one of my goals when I took over 8 years ago in Tennessee to work with the state to try to reduce cost and become better at what we were doing. You know, and I think there's been a lot of improvements over that period of time. You know, I think some of the counties deal with different issues at their level, but, you know, we service about 85 counties in Tennessee and collect a little over 6.2 million tires annually in the state. And there's probably 23 or so counties that we don't make money on, that we're negative. And I'm letting you know that because I feel like it's our responsibility to service all of those counties to the best of our ability. You know, one of the things Liberty's done, in closing about Liberty, is Liberty over the past 20 years has really revolutionized the tire recycling industry. It was previously a lot of mom and pop operations that we call. It collected those operations and built a network of collection facilities across the country to help us improve the equipment, the safety, and the product quality. So, you know, we've seen some significant changes in the quality of the product that we make across the U.S. over the past 20 years as a result. So, and we're constantly striving to improve that. In regards to the state of Tennessee's program, you know, I've had the opportunity to work with several states in the Southeast on their scrap tire programs, and, you know, I think Tennessee's program is a very good program. I think it's a very solid program. It's one of the few that takes the fee it collects and uses it for its intended purpose. You know, where we don't see that where I'm from, but, you know, hopefully we will one day. You know, I think there's opportunity to make it better. You know, there's obviously some differences when you talk about the rural areas and the city areas that, you know, we need to find solutions for to make it easier for the counties. But having the collection centers at the counties helps Tennessee reduce the cost of collecting tires. And on average in Tennessee, last year it ran about $90 a ton when we looked at all of what we were charging the counties. And when I compare that to Georgia, Georgia was about $136 a ton. So, you know, you can see a significant difference when you've got collection centers at the county level. In terms of the illegal dumping, that's a big topic. You know, some of the things that I've seen over the past 10 years is there's a large number of out-of-program retailers that don't pay into the program. You know, and I think that contributes significantly to illegal dumping. And we might want to look at a way to pull those retailers into the program. You know, I think also one of the issues is there's a lot of haulers that can go out and collect a tire from these particular retailers, and there's no registration, you know, there's no paperwork that tracks the scrap tire. You know, I think that would be something to look at, because those types of, you know, I hate to say regulations, they really help good businesses, you know, because that sort of activity hurts the state and it hurts companies like mine that try to do the right thing. So that's all I've got.
Do we want everyone to speak, or do you all want to ask some questions now? Do we have questions for Dewey now? Yes. Mayor Bakers.
I'm just curious about your comment about we've got out-of-provider retailers that, as I understand that aren't collecting the fee that that I pay when I buy new tires. I pay a fee. Are you saying that we've got providers in Tennessee that aren't paying that, and that the state, and that is that an enforcement issue, or what's the issue with that?
So the fee, so yes, that does happen. In a lot of cases that I see, it's a used tire dealer because the fee is not paid for a used tire. And that used tire may not have generated here in Tennessee. It may have come from Atlanta. It may have come from Chicago. It could have come from Europe. You know, it's just really hard to say. You know, and I think that's sort of a gray area that I would look at addressing.
And so is it, I guess what the question would be, is that a legislative hole that needs to be fixed, or is that simply an administrative rulemaking issue that needs to be resolved? And I'm welcome for whoever. I mean, it seems to me every tire sold, there ought to be that contribution going so that everybody's paying to deal with used tires that are no longer effective tires for that use. So I guess that's the question. Is it a legislative issue that needs to be looked at, or a rulemaking issue?
In 2012, I helped to rewrite Georgia's scrap tire laws because used tires had become somewhat of an issue because they didn't exist at the volume they do today 25 years ago when that legislation was written. So I would definitely look at some legislation to cover that because I believe that's where most of the problems are coming from what I see.
All right. Other questions? Oh, Dr. Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you for your comments. Walk me through the process because I was listening to what you were saying about some of the fees not being paid. I'm curious about how used tire dealers acquire tires and how that process may lend itself to a fee being paid on a tire one time. But by the time it gets to them, that tire has been sold multiple times by the time it gets to the consumer who may buy a tire at the used tire dealership. Can you walk us through the process of how used tire dealerships do acquire some tires?
Yeah, absolutely. So in most cases, we see situations where someone like yourself would buy a new vehicle and may change the tires at the dealership. Okay. And so those tires then become used. You know, they're collected, or even the dealership may sell them to someone, or someone may come at night and steal those tires.
Okay.
And then those tires are then sold to a retailer, a used tire retailer, and then sold again to another consumer. And I think from what I've seen, typically, you know, any tire that becomes used, it doesn't get resold multiple times. Right. You know, I think it's more than likely that it's only resold one time, and that doesn't occur to every tire. It's about 20% of the tires.
Okay. So in that instance, let's say I take my vehicle to maybe not the dealership, but maybe a Pep Boys or Goodyear and get a new tire there. They then take the used tires off of my vehicle, and this is the same process with dealerships where they might sell them to a used tire retailer.
Yeah, same
All right,
thing.
so then that tire goes there. Someone then buys that tire and may drive it until it is almost worn out. And then instead of going to a retailer to get new tires, they go back to that same used tire dealer or another one to get a new set of used tires. And so that tire that then doesn't have any tread on it left either gets, dumped or or how do they discard those tires?
So they could bring them to the county or to one of our collection centers, but then they would have to pay the full fee that the county's charging because, if they're not in program and they've paid into the program and they have credits.
Okay.
So, but see, and I think there's also cases where individuals that haul waste may come by and say, hey, for X, I'll take these tires and dispose of them for you. And so then we sort of lose the trail of where those tires end up.
Okay. That was very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Other questions or comments, Mr. Grantham? All right, next.
Yeah, I think it would be good to go to Jeremy Hooper, environmental consultant with Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, the Division of Solid Waste, and kind of go through the overview of the state's program and how that's managed from your level there.
Mr. Hooper, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Jeremy Hooper, TACIR Division of Solid Waste Management. I'm in the permitting section of solid waste program.
Is your mic on? Is a little red light on there?
There we go.
There you go. Thank you.
Jeremy Hooper, TDEC Division of Solid Waste Management. I'm in the solid waste program permitting section. So we handle tires in TDEC in a couple different areas. So in my program specifically, we permit collection sites such as convenience centers, which each county is required to have at least one collection site for tires. We also permit processors, which could be, in the tires case, a company that shreds the tire. So no tire can go to a landfill full. It has to go in pieces because it causes issues at the landfill. We also permit tire storage facilities, which are just locations for tires to be housed before they are moved to their next destination in a responsible manner, right? Covered to prevent them from getting puddles of rain in them and attracting mosquitoes, et cetera. We also have our materials management program, which runs the waste tire program. So that program works with the counties on waste tires. We talk to them about beneficial use of tires, how that can go about, how we have a market. We talk about markets with them and discuss ways to improve that. We also give them financial tools to look at their tires and how they manage them from a financial standpoint. And we also give them grants for tools to manage these items. In our enforcement program, this is where we really deal with illegal disposal of tires, illegal tire dumps. So when TDEC gets a call, we can get a complaint about illegal tires being dumped, say, in the woods. And that can come into our complaint system, which is online, or it can be a phone call. And we have 8 field offices across the state that manage the different counties, and they can go out and look into this tire dump. And if they can figure out who did it, then we can pursue, we can go after them, cite them, and recover cost. The issue with it is that we don't often know who did it, right? So if we can figure out who did it, then we can recover those costs. If not, it goes back to the county. And the county, we encourage to use the funds that we've been talking about, the $1 per tire, which is new, to manage their tires, right, in the county, which can be for collection, but also could be for cleanup. But as has been mentioned, in a lot of cases, that $1 may go to a county, say, residents that live around Davidson County, they don't actually live in Davidson County, they come into Davidson County, though, to buy the tire. That $1 goes to Davidson County, but then maybe they live outside the county. So now the county outside has to manage that tire, and they don't have the dollar associated with that. So we have seen that kind of stuff. Up around Kentucky, there is a dealer that these secondary used tires, or what my colleagues call tire jockeys, I don't know if that's the technical term or not, but they bring in tires from Kentucky. So there's no $1 associated with it on these counties up around Kentucky. And this is the specific example I'm giving you is in our Knoxville region. We're talking about a ton of tires just out there in the open that we can't prove who did it. So now it's left on the county to deal with the management of that. And they don't have that dollar per tire to address that. So that's where we see a lot of these issues from an enforcement perspective. I think that's, I mean, I think what he mentioned from Liberty's perspective really captured the majority of what the tire universe looks like. And TDEC is here to certainly help, but, you know, there are limits when these counties don't have the funds to manage them.
Questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good to see you, man.
Yeah, question. Let's say there's a piece of private property and there are tires on it, and an heir passes it on to his children, and the children find out the tires are there. There are 1,500 tires on the property.
Mm-hmm.
The person who's responsible for those tires being there is deceased. Are you saying that the county can go on the private property and clean that up if the county does that to their own expense? Or are you saying that there are financial tools available from TDEC that can be used to get those tires off of private property?
It's not TDEC money. It's so each new tire gets $1.35 charged to it by the tire dealer. 10 cents goes to the tire dealer. 35 cents comes to TDEC, which we use for grants, and then the $1 goes to the county. So we encourage the county to use that dollar for collection and management of the tires, but also cleanup purposes. But if we can prove who did it, then TDEC can recoup those costs.
Yeah, well, in this case, of course, who did it is no longer alive, and so the begs the question, are you saying the county can go on the private property and clean it up regardless of who pays for it? Let's say the county's willing to pay for it. Can we do that?
I'm not sure.
If we can't, then where are we?
I'm not sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Youngberg?
Senator what?
Youngberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a similar question. Sure. Do you know about the situation in Bristol, in Sullivan County? The former Sperry UNIVAC plant, which was a large manufacturing facility, I want to say, forgive me if my numbers are wrong, 1 million square feet. Private enterprise started collecting tires and disposing of them, and frankly filled that warehouse up.
Loosely, I am, yes.
To the roof.
Yes.
With tires. And I want to say there are, if not hundreds of thousands, certainly tens of thousands.
Yes.
So you're aware of that one?
Loosely, yes, I am.
Okay. So whose responsibility, since that individual who collected those tires and the funds, I don't know where they are, but where does the responsibility, because that is kind of in a way, a hidden illegal dumping site. It's obviously not visible as you drive by, you see a metal structure.
Right. Yeah, so we have to be made aware of it, of course, and then we can investigate that. But, I mean, the first step, obviously, is try to figure out where that person is. And that goes to our enforcement folks, and then we work with, I guess, the Environmental Criminals Division to go after those folks, if we can. Otherwise, we have to work with the local authorities to try to figure out some way to address that.
Okay. So, because I know it's a concern both for Representative Crawford and I, because that's something. Liberty doesn't know. I take it you don't know about that situation.
I've heard about the warehouse. I haven't seen it myself, but I'm not familiar with all the details.
So, and it's just one, I guess, sorry, Mr. Chairman, for digging into to a local issue, but it's one where the city realizes there's an issue, and it compounds itself because I know we've got discussion of tires and mosquito-borne diseases. My concern becomes you've got that size facility in an area. If that catches fire, it will be years before it goes out. And truly, I mean, years before it goes out. And
yeah, it's a problem.
That creates right into your bailiwick a huge public health issue.
Right.
It is kind of in a residential area too. It is. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, another thing we have an issue with is we just recently actually pursued a guy and were able to charge him. He was using Craigslist, and he would reach out to folks. Well, people reach out to him via Craigslist. He'd say, I have these tires. I will bring them to you. You pick out what you want. I'll come back and get the others. So you pay me for what you want, and then I'll come back at a later date and get them. But he never comes back. He just leaves. And he's been going through several of the states in the Southeast, and we were actually able to. It's in the process now, but that's an example of where we've been able to go after somebody for that.
Mayor Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your enforcement officer met with us a couple of weeks ago in Henry County. We're cleaning up 2 illegal tire dumps. One tire dump is adjacent to property that is our Class 3, 4 landfill. So they took them almost to the landfill where they should have gone, and they put it on private property. It's going to take a local and a state effort to do that, but my exasperation with the process is not the person that you sent. It's you do not have enough enforcement officers across the state. This person works 2 or 3, all 3 divisions of the state, and I certainly feel for him. And he said if we can't do it on a local basis, our sheriff's department or our local police department, he doesn't know anything we can do. So just having that, although he came out and met with us and had a good meeting, it leaves it in our hands, and we are having to clean that up ourselves. We were able to use our litter crew to go on the property, but we had to have permission of the private landowner who did not know the tires were dumped on the property. In our community, we believe we know, and we have put out the information on perhaps who's doing that. But still, your enforcement division has a difficult time other than just writing a letter or maybe dropping by. So I think if we could put something in place to give them a little bit more power, I think we're having them do something that they don't have the power to actually do. And I would like us to look at that to give more enforcement power to your division.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, I've got Mayor McDonald. I'll come back to you, Mayor Bakers. Oh, okay. Mayor Bakers.
As we look at studying this going forward, I know there is legislation in place that will enable local government, at least a municipality, if we have private property that is creating a public health situation because of trash or vermin or whatever, we're authorized to give notice. You clean it up. If you don't, we clean it up, and then you either pay us or it gets taxed. You know, and sometimes we don't always even get back to property, but at least the procedure's in place. If that wouldn't apply to the situations I'm hearing where it sounds like there is a public health hazard with a warehouse full of thousands of tires, perhaps that is a recommendation we can make to the legislature as a tweaking of that area of the law that perhaps gives greater enforcement authority to both municipalities and counties and perhaps even TDEC as well.
Other questions? It seems to me along that question of a building, someone's given access to that building. Does the law currently allow? I used to own some property that a highway now went through. People would dump tires there all the time. My sons and I'd have to go up there and pick them up, and couches and all kinds of stuff to get rid of them. It was quite a pain until they built the road. I had no idea they were doing it and would have stopped them if at all possible. But if we've got a building someone's granted access to, why wouldn't that landowner derive some liability or responsibility from allowing that to occur?
He could. So one of the issues we have is proving that the tires in this instance are a solid waste. So that's one of the things that gets us hung up all the time is if someone we allow the storage and collection of materials that if someone can prove that there's market value and that they can do something with it at some point in time, these items can stay there for up to a year. And so we get kind of caught up in what the definition of these things are. Is this something that he has a legit option to move, thus we would be getting in the way of his business, or is it a solid waste that he's just trying to dispose of or just push off to the side that he doesn't have to deal with? And that's one of the things that we have issues with a lot of times, is just proving, in fact, that this is a waste, and this gentleman or this company is just setting this stuff aside because they don't want to deal with it.
All right. Mayor Brooks.
Thanks, Chairman. So, Mr. Hooper, I'm going to direct this question to you, but it could be to anyone on the panel. Liberty, at my count, I think you said we're not sure who the tire came from about 3 times.
Yeah.
and I don't want to do a mashup, which is a word my kid uses, but the previous presenters talked about 5G and all this technology. And if I can put a chip in my dog's back and find that dog anywhere on the planet, is there technology that we just aren't using that these tire manufacturers or tire sellers could put something in the steel belt that would track, and that part of your problem could be traceable?
I'll let you, if you know something about that. That's not something I'm familiar with.
Well, we don't obviously manufacture tires, but, you know, I think that's something that could be done at the manufacturer's side. I mean, I don't know what the economic impact would be. But in relation to determining what's a scrap tire and a used tire, I mean, that's something I have a lot of experience with, and I'd be happy to help the state on that. So.
Mayor Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had that situation come up in Henry County on the 2 tire dumps that we're working on. We were told that we should get cameras up around the sites where we think the tires are coming from, and somehow get our people, our law enforcement investigators, to go in and mark the tires in some way, put a chip or something in the tires, so the state would have the ability to enforce it. So once again, I think it's going to take a tremendous effort between the local and TDEC to get this problem solved. Those 2 tire dumps already have cost us in disposal over $4,500. You know, just, and for our small county, that's even taking it from the fund. It's not beneficial to us to do that, but we've got to keep our community clean.
Sure.
So once again, how we get to the point in time that this makes sense and we're able to actually determine who the violator is, we've got a real issue. Thank you.
Yeah, to that point, I have seen, I don't know that TDEC has done this, and I don't think we have trail cameras like you use for wildlife tracking, but I've seen examples in other places where they feel confident that someone is a dump is a reoccurring thing, that someone is coming back there several times over however many days or months or whatever, and they put out a trail camera, and then you can get a picture of an individual or a video. So that's something that certainly local governments could do, and it's fairly inexpensive to get a trail camera that's basic, to set that up, to at least try to get evidence of the individual doing it.
Representative Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is to the panel and staff. You know, for certain things we have in the state, we have a hotline that people can call a number and report, you know, different things. Is there a hotline set up for illegal tire dumping, and what department would that go to? TDEC? And I'm just curious, do we have anything set up for this?
I don't know that there's anything specific to tire dumps as a hotline for finding a tire dump, but for litter, for highways, for other things, there's certainly ways to do that. And if, Mike, you want to talk about that?
Waste bin on the TDEC side.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Go ahead.
TDEC has set up a site that if you see a violation, you can report it, and it becomes part of the record that it has been reported.
And I'm not putting the department down by any means, but, you know, the general public out here, I would have never known to call this number. I think a little prevention here, a little advertisement on prevention could help us out somewhat.
Yes.
It's not going to fix the problem, but, you know, if you can catch a few people and enforce what we have in place, it will should get people's attention. So just curious about your thing.
Well, that's Waste Bin is our it's our database manager in the Division of Solid Waste. So when folks report a complaint, or we do an inspection of even just a site that manages Waste Bin, that's where we put all that data. So that's where we house it. We track what happens. So if we send an inspector out from our Knoxville field office to inspect a tire dump, that's where they're going to put their inspection report, any pictures, and the outcome. So that's where we track all this over time and can look at trends, et cetera. So on a monthly basis, I generate a report about everything going on in the solid waste program, and I send that to my higher ups, and then one of that includes illegal dumps and tires. So we keep track of that, and illegal dumping is, our biggest issue that we have. It's not always tires, but we keep track of that through waste bin.
The citizen can also follow along, logging into their their database. He can follow along to see what is being done about that, if anything's being done.
Yeah, so any complaint that is registered, we're going to get back to the individual who has registered the complaint with our findings. And those complaints, as you've talked about, can be given to us via telephone, by our online complaint system. They can call central office here in Nashville, or the 8 field offices also handle complaints. But as you said, not everybody knows of that. It's something that we work on. Of course, we use social media, we use newsletters. We work with the counties on messaging with their solid waste programs to inform folks that these things exist. But there's always room to reach out to more people.
All right, next I have Mayor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question is going to ask you on page 2 of the TACIR report, under the $5 tire environmental fee that is listed there. Could we get a breakdown of that? How many dollars that's generating? And is that, like, for an example, is that $5 a car or $5 a tire? Since there's 5 tires minimum on the car, counting the spare. How's that money spent? How's it getting back to the local level? It was put in for a specific reason. Is it making its way all to the for-profit entities? Is it coming? Give us a breakdown of how that money is being spent since the inception of that, so we can have a better handle on that. I would ask that to you, Mr. Chairman. And then the other graph or pie chart, whatever you want to call it, is in the paragraph above that, how the dollar goes to the counties. How's that divided between the cities? I'm going to speak on behalf of my city partners here. How's that been separated out so that each entity knows what they're getting and not all the charge is back to the county side?
Bob, will you make sure that's considered next time?
Yes, absolutely. And
Anyone have any comment on that today off the top of your head?
I mean, I can say that the $5 fee is it's for new vehicle sold with 5 or fewer a normal vehicle sold.
So it's $1.25 per tire on those.
Essentially, you're talking 4 tires and a spare is a $5. If it's a vehicle with more tires, there are a couple other small parts of that, but just basically for what we're talking about, normal everyday folks.
You know how that money's
how it's being spent. I know what its purpose is in the statute as far as what that program was set up for. We'll be continuing to talk with TDEC and the people that are with that particular program, kind of get some more explanation of what it's been doing. But yeah, that's a big part of what we're looking at.
All right.
Thank you.
I think Representative Love, didn't you want to be recognized?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm listening to the many comments being made about the effort to try to get people to comply with the law. And I want to ask this question. Has there ever been consideration given to incentivizing persons to turn these tires in versus penalize them and financially incentivizing? All right, so I think you said about 6 million tires a year you all collect. What would it look like if we were to incentivize persons to bring tires in to one of these collection facilities, and maybe it's 50 cents per tire? Has anyone considered that?
The city of Memphis does something similar to that once a year, and it's actually $1 a tire.
Okay.
And the line getting to our facility is so long that it blocks several cross streets. So we had to find an alternate location. But, I think obviously that solves the sort of economic issue with tires. But my concern, if I were the state, would be tires coming from Kentucky or Georgia, in other states. So, I don't know how you would manage that. But, the one thing about the dumping is we know that the tires are generated at the retailers. And if there was, in other states, they track tires through manifest. When a tire leaves the store, it has to be manifested. It has to be transported by a registered carrier. And so it's a little easier then to enforce where those tires are going. Because when you go to those retailers and they don't have the paperwork and they can't, they've sold 1,000 tires, but they've got paperwork for disposing of 100. You see a huge difference there, and obviously there's some concern. In the state of Georgia, they've recently added several enforcement people. And also in that process of making sure that the retailers are complying with the law, they were able to identify several retailers that weren't paying into the program. And so, that helped fund the program in addition to helping these retailers comply with the law. And those are things that I'd consider, if you look at legislative changes.
Okay, thank you. And I just really wanted to emphasize that point because oftentimes we try to find solutions to issues of dumping, whether it was with aluminum cans or bottles. We start to incentivize persons and give them financial incentive through recycling. You do find that obviously, if you're talking about in Memphis, the line is that long. It's working. It may not be the effect that one wanted, but clearly that's working, and I'm sure we can always tweak legislation to prevent someone from Kentucky or Georgia or some of the state bringing tires in and trying to sell them. But that's a good problem to have, particularly if we're talking about the long-lasting effects of tire dumping, mosquito-borne illnesses, health hazards, persons having tires just dumped in their yard or any place else. So I think we may want to say this in front of Representative Parks and turn to Memphis for a model for how to solve, at least maybe in a pilot program to expand other parts of the state to see what it would look like to implement this and go from there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lundberg, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hooper, I want to go back a couple minutes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like you were saying TDEC has a difficulty determining if this is solid waste, this tire, and this tire is a potential profit. But at the same time, I believe it's Mr. Stooksbury, is that right? Yeah. He is going, I have that answer. Have the two of you connected? Because it seems like this is taking an inordinate amount of time on TDEC's part to make this determination. If he has a relatively easy answer.
The time, he's already mentioned that it's the time factor. It can set for a year, or during that year, they can rotate tires through, they can add some on, they can take them out, and, excuse the expression, take them out to the holler and throw them away.
Right.
So the system we really need is, back to what Mr. Grantham mentioned, is even a second-hand tire has some kind of fee marking or so forth that goes on it, where there's accountability. And you can have folks that will stack tires there for 2 or 3 years and they say, oh, but we sold them off or we got rid of them. There's got to be an accountability. Yes, they have been moved out, or they're just the same tires anyway.
Otherwise, you could have these, if I may, Mr. Chairman, in perpetuity that they just keep going. So you need something more definitive policy-wise so that you can.
That's right. I mean, when an individual who is housing those tires, all they've got to do is be able to tell us, I mean, in many cases, that I'm waiting for the market to change, or it's coming, I'm going to use this for fuel, I'm going to have someone chop this tire up and use it as aggregate at the state parks or wherever. And it's hard for us to say, no, he's not. They're just waiting there to dispose. So it becomes really difficult for us to prove that and force them to do something. So it's kind of like this little loophole that they know that they can work, and they often do. But we haven't, I don't know that we've spoke directly with him about this stuff, and any sort of suggestions are always welcome, of course.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Other questions? Mayor Brooks?
Thank you, Chairman, and to my colleague at Williamson County, who asked the question of our staff about the $5 collections, and he asked an interesting question. He's a county mayor, I'm a city mayor, so I went ahead and sent a little text message using 4G technology. We don't have 5G. And my CFO and city manager say the city of Cleveland gets 0 of those dollars, even though you can see the landfill. Yes, it's located in the county, but you can see it very clearly. So I will be very interested to see the findings of your report, but I can report to you that as of the city of Cleveland, that answer is 0.00.
All right.
The car sales, I think, would be 100% in our city. I don't know of a car dealer in the county.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Where is that money, number one, coming from, and number two, where is it? I'd like to have it tracked, and maybe we'll get that next time.
Thank you, Chairman.
All right, thank you. A question on the, I'm intrigued by the 1 million square foot warehouse. I'm just intrigued. If that thing catches on fire, we're in trouble. It's going to burn until the world ends. Mr. Grantham of Liberty Tire, a location like that with so many tires is not profitable for you to go and take in that many tires?
So you're asking if we were to go and pick them up at no charge?
Yes.
Okay. No, because here's the economic model. We're running, like I mentioned before, a transportation company. And then when you recycle a tire, in most cases, it costs you more to make the product than what it's sold for. So, you know, you've also got that transportation expense and then a little bit of net negative. So that tip fee covers that front-end cost.
And what is the tip fee? You're talking about the $1 per tire?
Well, it varies, but in Tennessee, the average last year was about, what we charged was about $90 a ton, which roughly is about 90 cents a tire.
90 cents per tire?
Yes, if you use 20 pounds.
So it's just not economically feasible for you to drive up there and get 1 million tires. It just won't work.
Right, and so to add to that, one of the things that we've been working hard to do is create end markets that drive the value, like rubberized asphalt. Because if we can get to that point, and most of the tires are going for that use, you know, that product's worth significantly more, and then it changes the whole economic model. Then we pay for tires. We don't charge.
Okay. Well, let's hope for that. Other questions, comments? If you do, I know a large building with a lot of tires in it. If we can make some rubberized playgrounds, which I was on one in Florida, it's pretty neat concept. So, oh, I'm sorry, Mayor Greer, you recognize?
One last comment I would make as we continue with this process. I think it's would be vital for us to hear from the solid waste directors in our counties, you know, maybe a panel of 4 or 5 of the solid waste directors, because that's where the so-called rubber meets the road. They're the ones dealing with the problems. We've been dealing with this for, with Mr. Stooksbury for probably the last 15 years. And we have never come to the point in time of getting anywhere close to a solution to help the local governments. And I think till you hear from the people that actually have to deal with the problem on a local basis, you don't get to the total complexity of this issue. Thank you.
Mayor Greer, I was just advised, this report's due January?
Yes, yes.
So we're going to be a little pushed on having another panel. Dr. Lepard said that they can contact these counties and interview them and add that to a report, Bob?
Yeah, I would say I've spoken with a few, and that's sort of why we brought Mr. Stooksbury in to be, you know, sort of, he's works with many counties, and sort of having him on the panel will talk about what he's seen in a variety of counties rather than pick one to come in and speak on a panel today. But well, I definitely we'll get with you, Mayor Greer, and Todd. We can talk to your waste people in particular and anyone else, you know.
And Senator Lundberg, and he's
absolutely.
recognized.
Thank you. And I was specifically going to ask if you would contact Sullivan County and specifically the city of Bristol to talk about that building.
Any other counties that want to be specifically included in that?
Bradley.
Bradley, all right. Bradley, Henry, and Sullivan. Can we have perhaps some specific reports, a letter or something from each one of those persons? And
I do have one follow-up question.
all right. Mayor Brooks.
Thanks, Chairman. Mr. Grantham, I did have a follow-up question. Chairman Carter mentioned the rubberized playground. We actually are having one installed right now. In fact, last week in Cleveland, we had a volunteer day, and we spread enormous white vats of pellets of former tires. And during that volunteer day, I asked the question, okay, if we have tires all over Cleveland and Bradley County, is it viable for us to buy the chipping machine as a municipality, and all of a sudden every playground we've got at every school could become, is that you're in the recycling business, and no one could give me a definitive answer. We have a local contractor who bought a gravel machine. He doesn't have to go to a crusher. He bought a crushing machine,
crusher.
and guess what? He doesn't have to call anybody anymore. He makes his own gravel. Are those machines viable in the marketplace right now? I'm just seeking solutions, quite frankly.
It's extremely complicated.
So I can't drop a tire in and make those pellets?
No. You know, I'd say there's a saying in my industry, the best way to make a small fortune in tire recycling is to start with a large fortune. So, you know, and I'd obviously be happy to show the details, and you're welcome to visit any one of my facilities. But it's very, very complicated, and there's a lot of maintenance that goes into the equipment, and then only about 30% of a tire can be used for rubber mulch.
3-0.
Yeah, it's mainly the sidewall material, which is the best part of the tire for the rubber mulch. So then you have the other parts of the tire which aren't as valuable. And every time you want to take a piece of rubber down, it creates value, but you need another piece of equipment to do it. And that's where it becomes complicated. You can't just have one machine. And that's where you see tire recyclers get into trouble, where they start with one machine and realize, you know, they're only halfway there and they're going to have to buy one or two more. And, you know, it's just not what they thought it was.
Mr. Tewksbury, you have a comment?
Making tire-derived fuel, you'll have different buyers that want different specifications. You'll have ones that want the metal 90% removed. Some will take it because their boilers can, after it burns the rubber, will collect these and they clean the metal out and sell it. It's not a lot of it, but it's still good metal. So the need drives the market, what you can do with it.
Complicated.
What should, and I'm going to say this, what needs to be consistent is what each county's paying for disposal. Now, there's going to be a difference in transportation and handling and trailers and all that to meet the need, but it needs to be standardized on what it costs for disposal.
Representative Crawford.
My good friend from Cleveland brought up this, and it made me think, surely to the good Lord, there has to be some kind of treatment. You don't just stick a tire in there and use the sidewalls to put on a playground. There has to be some kind of treatment so it doesn't make people sick, correct? Or
So the tires are obviously cut by the shredders, and that's what separates the fiber and the wire and the rubber. But then once we get that product to what specification it needs to be for rubber mulch, you know, then it goes through a system where we paint that material and package it. So
okay,
The dust from the material is usually what causes the illnesses.
Yeah.
If it's not treated.
It is not treated?
If it's not treated.
Oh, if
you-
it's not
If it's not
treated.
treated, you'll have a dust. You've heard the stories concerning respiratory problems. That's what causes it. It's not been treated, and the fine powder off of it can be inhaled.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
All right, next. Other questions or comments? Wow, this is interesting. I had no idea this would be so interesting. All right, who's next?
I think we'd like to get to Dr. Moncayo from the Tennessee Department of Health to talk about the public health risks, the danger, mosquitoes breeding and illnesses that are spread by tires that are discarded illegally.
Dr. Moncayo, thank you for being here, and it seems like we've naturally evolved into concerns about safety and our health, so we're to you now.
Sure.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. No. Oh, there it is. Okay. Thank you. So I'm with the Tennessee Department of Health, and I direct the vector-borne disease program. So we survey for diseases transmitted by vectors such as mosquitoes or ticks. So things that you've probably heard of a lot are Zika, West Nile, Lyme disease, that sort of thing. So today what I want to talk to you is about this connection with tires and mosquito-borne diseases. So in this first slide that I have here, I'm showing what's called the Asian tiger mosquito. This is a mosquito that was imported from Southeast Asia into the United States, specifically in the Port of Houston in 1985. It came through imported tires. Back then, and I'm not an expert on tires, but back then there was importation of tires into the U.S. As well as exportation of tires, and I'm assuming that still goes on. Yes.
And so to back up a second here, tires provide a great habitat for mosquitoes. You get a little bit of water in there, and the mosquito, the female, lays her eggs there, and lays her eggs on the water line onto the tire. When the water evaporates, the eggs stay on there, and they can be transported literally all over the world. So this story will come here to Tennessee. So it was imported in '85, the Asian tiger mosquito. It's a very aggressive, invasive mosquito. It's a daytime biting mosquito. If you're anywhere in Tennessee enjoying, outdoors, and you get a mosquito landing on you, it's probably the Asian tiger mosquito. And it's easy to recognize, very dark body, white stripes. So after '85, it landed here, and it made its way throughout the Southeast through interstate highways. So these mosquitoes can travel, of course, they can fly, but they might fly 1 or 2 football fields. But transporting them in tires takes them hundreds and hundreds of miles away. So we've seen them take hold throughout the Southeast.
Doctor, can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure.
Senator Lumberg.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just for me. Is an Asian tiger mosquito much different than, quote, the common mosquito we have? Give us some semblance of why we're discussing the Asian tiger mosquito.
Sure. So this is an example leading to the emergence of lacrosse encephalitis in Tennessee. But there are about 80 or so mosquito species in our state. A lot of them transmit some sort of diseases. So this is just one species of many that there are across the world. So this particular mosquito made it to Tennessee, and in 1997, it was established populations throughout our counties. So all of our counties have this now. So sort of in the background, many years prior to this, there was lacrosse encephalitis in our state.
And lacrosse encephalitis is transmitted by another species of mosquito called the tree hole mosquito. This takes advantage of tree holes, so it's a very rural mosquito. And it was transmitting lacrosse among squirrels and chipmunks. And it was essentially maintained in that cycle. Occasionally, you might have a tree hole mosquito biting a human, so you might get somebody infected. But in 1997, we saw a large outbreak. And this virus mainly affects children under the age of 15. So it's an important pediatric encephalitis. And it leads to brain swelling and coma, and in some cases, death. So there have been children in Tennessee that have died of this. So we see these cases year after year now. Now it's in Tennessee, it's not going away. Just like West Nile, it's in Tennessee, it won't go away. Essentially, those two viruses take advantage of wildlife. They don't really need us. What happens is that there's a spillover into the human population. And it's thought that this Asian tiger mosquito was the vector that was able to spill it over into humans. So this mosquito is very, different species will feed on different things. This one feeds on almost anything. So it will feed on squirrels and chipmunks, and then will feed on humans. So we see this disease year after year, as well as West Nile. And this is some data from last year when we were able to survey a large part of the state due to Zika funding that we had. So West Nile, the mosquito, in that case, the house mosquito, can also take advantage of tires. And that's another disease that we see throughout the state spilling over into humans. And that, of course, affects not just children, but all ages.
All right. Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, and I apologize, Mr. Chairman, for so many questions. From the Department of Health, and I know you're not a tire expert, so is a multifold question for you. Are mosquitoes the biggest health risk to Tennesseans from tires? And if magically Liberty could eliminate every tire in Tennessee used recyclable, non-recyclable, what impact would that have on the mosquito population and the health? Would the encephalitis drop dramatically from that?
That's a difficult question. That's a difficult question to answer. There's a lot. Tires provide habitat for mosquitoes, but there's a lot of other things that provide habitats for mosquitoes. Barrels that you might leave outside, gutters that are clogged and they're retaining water. So there's a lot. Anything that retains water will be a good habitat for mosquitoes. The thing I think is, including tree holes, the thing I think is unique for tires is that they move around. And so they can transport mosquito eggs long distances. Lacrosse encephalitis has another little twist in its story, and that is that the female, when it lays her eggs, it lays infected eggs. So these eggs could be laid in Knoxville and then on tires, and they're infected, and they may be transported somewhere else. Then you have a rainfall event, they hatch, they're infected, and they're out infecting people. So there's a lot of other habitats, but tires are particularly interesting because of that. When Zika occurred, we were concerned about the yellow fever mosquito that is very good at transmitting Zika virus. And this is also transported through tires. So we were monitoring for the yellow fever mosquito here during that time. We couldn't find it. It's sort of a needle in a haystack. It's difficult to find, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is in there. But we certainly want to avoid, other stories like this where you have species that can come into our state.
Other questions or comments at this stage? Every time someone says something, it raises a lot of very interesting issues. And I never thought waste tires would be so interesting. Yes, sir, Mr.
There's
Grantham.
one thing that I can provide information on is the reason for the tires and the mosquitoes is the tire is obviously rubber, and because of its shape, it holds water. Well, the tire, being rubber, acts as an insulator. The sun beating on it makes it warm, and so it actually becomes somewhat like an incubator for mosquitoes. And water inside the tire and mosquitoes breeding inside a tire, they can breed up to 100 times faster, according to the EPA. And so that's why, when you see tire dumps, you go out and you're just infested with mosquitoes because of that fact. So,
All right. Bobby, you want to get us back on track?
I think we'll have Mr. Stooksbury wrap things up and talk about his experience with the counties and finish up with as many questions as we can.
Yeah, if we could, I was very interested. Dr. McCurve, thank you so much for being here. Anyone have any other questions for him if we're going to move off the health aspects? All right. Mr. Stooksbury?
Better give, if you don't mind, I'd like to give a little background. I've been, had experience dealing with solid waste for 34 years, public works director, city manager, and as a consultant to counties. I've closed landfills in the state of Virginia and the state of Mississippi, developed disposal systems in Tubaca province in Honduras and island of Grenada, and also done disposal and recycling at Grafenwehr Training Center in Germany. So I've got a little experience in this. One of the things that we need to focus on, I do believe, and it really hadn't been, is how to take care of the financing to get rid of these tires or put them in the beneficial end use. TCA 67-4-1610 is the fee that we've been talking about, the $1.25 or $1.35, 10 cents goes to the tire dealer. Over a period of years, initially it was used from 92 to 2002 to shred tires and put them in a landfill. It was updated in 2002 to go to beneficial end users. TDEC used, the mode that TDEC used to track this money was through doing manifest. Not a bad idea, but somewhere along the line, tire dealers got the feeling that was their money because it was paying for disposal of tires. And the county program, and I have to say this, the main point of a county program is to do a safe and economical disposal. That's the goal, and that's the goal of every county in the state. What we found out, we've narrowed down the way to do it to 95 different ways. So that money, when it goes to the county, what it was originally meant to do is establish a place for residential and commercial tires to be brought in. It wasn't established to be a commercial disposal center. So what we need to do is focus on, this is the site the county established. We take this dollar that the county gets to establish this site. We take out residential to keep the citizens, let's say, tired. What you have when you come to illegal dumpers, you have basically three categories. The guy that takes his tire home, throws it out because he thinks he might reuse it, which causes the mosquitoes in the neighborhood. You have a do-it-yourselfer who just has an idea how he's going to use the tire to build something. And then you have the illegal dumper. What we have in place to clean these up, and you've dealt with it, after it gets to be 1,000 tires, you can get a grant through TDEC. But the problem we run into is the fact that there's so much back and forth, as Jeff was mentioning, okay, we go inspect it, we go back here, and we decide whether it falls within this certain category to apply for grant. What we need to do is develop the line that the money that we get back from the dollar a tire that goes directly back to county can be used without having to go to TDEC or anybody else, as long as it's decided by the solid waste director that this needs to be cleaned up, that it does develop a problem up to 1,000 tires, that money can be used for. Over 1,000 tires, TDEC takes it over, and there's no back and forth. They need to be allowed to take part of that 1.5 million they get a year from the quarter part of it, and hire people to work with these. Bob does a fantastic job trying to develop the county's understanding of how tires can be used. To give him the opportunity to work with their grant program for any tire dumps over 1,000 to be cleaned up and taken from start to finish by TDEC. Anything below that, the dollar tire could be used to clean up a local site, where it won't be sitting there. Another thing we keep dealing with, and what, a million tires? You know, the law says that dollar tire said beneficial end use on it, and I wanted it understood. I'm all for recycling beneficial end use, but it also states, if you go over to 68 211 867 D2, that yes, it is preferred that it goes to beneficial end use, but it can be used if a county proves, and basically through cost benefit analysis, it's more expedient to shred it and landfill it. So we've been driven by the grant program that we had from 2002 to 2014, that that's the only thing it could be used for. In an emergency situation where you have the million tires, and you'd have to work with county would have to work with TDEC on it, you can take the approach of a monofill. Shred those tires, put them in monofill. Personally, I suggest, especially in West Tennessee, that it be work with TDEC to use it in an engineer process to work with erosion, where you put all these gullies, put them in the gully, commingle it with dirt. You can even build check dams out of the tires, the whole tires, backfill them, compact them, and build the check dam and reclaim land with it. I'm just throwing out possibilities. But there is alternatives in emergency situations where if you've got to, don't let that tire sit there. Don't let it become, as Dewey says, become an incubator. Either get it to Liberty Tire or get it off the street. And it can be done, and there's ways to legally do it. Say you mentioned talking to solid waste directors. That, these are the guys that got to do it. As I said earlier, there's 95 different ways. And DOT, like when they have to contract, they have to work their contract around how many trailers they're going to have, how far they're going to have to haul it. And in some cases, like we talk about illegally dumped tires, they degrade. They can't be used sometimes. They just have to be chewed up and thrown away. Illegal tire dumps, sometimes that's just what you need to do. Chew them up, haul them to a landfill, or you can haul them to a 3-4 landfill. In your case, you could do that.
Mayor Greer.
But we need to delineate, we need to get away from some of this mindset that that dollar belongs to the tire dealer. And I challenge everybody here to look at next time you buy a set of tires, you'll notice it has $1.35 on it, but it'll also have anywhere from $1.50 to $2.50 for disposal on it. You're being charged for it, and then the county, in some cases, is actually paying for it.
Mayor
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mike, for your comments. But just our community alone, we wrote a letter to TDEC and says, how can we use the money, can we use it to take care of these tires? Well, they couldn't respond to that because not in all cases can we take it to beneficial end use. It's not, we can take it to our 3-4 landfill.
Well, here's where some of the confusion came in. In 2014, the law was changed, as far as the fee, and it was changed, one, that instead of money being administered by TDEC and then coming to the county, it comes directly to the county. The whole point of that was to have that option that's spelled out in 68-211-867, and it's referenced in the fee law. But somewhere along the line, and I don't know where, somebody added 2 words to it: beneficial use, instead of just applying to the law, which I just covered. And it threw the mindset off that dollar can't be used for anything else. When this was originally drafted and passed in 91, there are four thinkers. They were thinking 4 ahead about all this, and they put that in there. There's also one, and when we being beaten over the head, and I've got to say this: we're beaten over the head, and I'm all for recycling, but at some point, it's not economically feasible. The whole point of recycling is conservation of resource. And if a county ends up losing money recycling, they're not conserving the county's resources. We've got to be solid waste, period. Recycling, the whole 9 yards, is a business. And counties, up until 1991, it's mostly a personal service. Up until that time, counties are set up for general services. And we've been put in, since 91, have been put in a position where we're providing personal services. And it's got to be approached that way. And it's going to be approached in 95 different ways. And I will be quiet now. Excuse me, John.
Questions?
As one of your board members said, I get a little too passionate about this.
Well, it continues to be confusing to local governments on what we should and could do. And we, at the taxpayer expense in our recycling program, use 7 cents off of our tax rate to support recycling because we think we need to. And that's a decision that we've made.
What is best for you? Carroll County, I throw that out as an example. They have door-to-door waste pickup across the whole county. That is integrated in their one fee to help cover the recycling. Representative Love made the comment about buying tires back. If that works for Shelby County, that's the thing that needs to be done.
Yeah, I agree.
It won't work for Wayne County.
Other questions or comments? All right, Bob, you want to sum it up for us?
I just want to take a minute to thank our panelists and everybody for all the great questions. It's really going to help me going forward. And
may I ask one thing be added?
Absolutely.
I'm a old car hobbyist nut and about to build a fairly large building to work on them, store them, and I was just thinking, we talked about fuel. Is there some? I have a friend that owns a large construction company. He heats his shop with waste oil. He bought a waste oil heater that's EPA approved. How difficult is it to turn tires into fuel, and is there a method to do that? And is that something I ought to consider in my new building for heat rather than natural gas?
What is 1,400 BTUs tires burn at?
So tires do create a lot of heat due to the fact that they're mostly oil. I'm not familiar with what all it would take to utilize that tire, but there are companies, cement companies, that burn whole tires to create heat and run their process.
Wow.
And CEMEX is one of them. Unfortunately, they just haven't been very consistent over the past few years. They've had some problems with their feed system. But
That's the main thing about using tire-derived fuel, is being able, when you get it in a boiler, you can't heap it. It's got to be spread out, or you get really hot spot.
Okay.
Tires burn, and I'm pulling this from my memory, which is somehow is getting shallower and shallower. Tires burn at about 1,400 BTU. Coal burns at 900 to 1,000. Garbage runs at about 500. So, you know, I'm not a mechanical engineer, I'm a civil engineer. But I always wondered if some way we couldn't develop a process that you commingle the tires and the garbage and it burns the same heat as coal.
Yeah, I would
I'm
say,
a dreamer.
Mr. Chairman, that tire-derived fuel is actually a big percentage of what a lot of these tires end up used for, but it's in the large scale, cement, paper mills, things like that. At a small scale, I haven't found anything yet.
Don't
but
see
we'll,
applicability.
we'll keep looking.
Well, thank you so much. Gentlemen, it's extremely interesting, and thank you all and for what you've done. And I'm going to be looking for tiger mosquitoes. I say that because I think I saw one the other night. I thought, wow, that thing's got stripes on it. And it just struck me as something different from what I'd seen before. So anyway. That was, I was hysterical after that, so it took a few days for the reality to return. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We appreciate your time and efforts, and hope that this benefits the citizens of the state of Tennessee. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next, cord cutting and local revenue. The final report is for approval. We're really close on a quorum. I saw Representative Parkinson left, Senator Yarborough, and had several had to leave. We're going to have a close count of whether we have the. Okay, all right. Yeah, Senator Gardenhire has joined us, and we're going to get to you next. So thank you for coming, and thank you for your text during this. It was an interesting conversation, wasn't it? Yeah. The tire problem is a much larger problem than I'd ever considered. So interesting. All right. Matthew, you ready?
All right, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Commission. Again, so today I'll be presenting the cord cutting and local government revenue report for final approval by the Commission. You can find, this is behind tab 8 in your docket books with the accompanying memo.
Make it quick.
This report was prepared in response to a request at the January 26, 2018 Commission meeting from then Chairman Mark Norris, who requested that the Commission study the effects of cord cutting on the market for cable, satellite, and streaming video services, and relatedly, whether or what effects these changes might have on local government revenue in Tennessee, given the differences in the taxes and fees that apply to each of these services. Since the draft report, we have added 2 maps to the final, and these are the same maps that were presented with the draft as handouts in May. The first, which can be found on page 20 in the report, shows which states apply sales tax to each of these services. And the second map, which can be found on page 28 in the report, shows which states authorize cable television franchise fees to be collected. There's one additional update that I want to bring to your attention. Since the presentation of the draft report, the proposed federal rule that clarifies the types of compensation that must be counted toward the 5% federal cap on cable franchise fees was adopted by the Federal Communications Commission. And so language in the report has been updated to reflect the FCC's action. It's anticipated that this rule change could decrease the overall package of compensation that some local governments currently receive through their cable franchise agreements. And I'll pause there. Are there any questions or concerns that I can address related to those updates in the report? Okay.
None? All right. Go ahead, Matthew.
The report itself follows the same structure as the draft. It examines the factors that are affecting the market for video services, and it provides an overview of the recent trends in this market. And it also examines whether these changes are affecting local government revenue or whether they might affect local government revenue in Tennessee, and whether any changes to the state's tax and fee structure or its cable franchising laws are warranted. Based on a review of other states' laws and on interviews with providers and with local officials, the report focuses specifically on sales tax and cable franchise fees. Tennessee is one of 17 states that apply sales tax to each of these services. And regarding cable franchise fees, industry analysts do predict that the shift by consumers away from cable services will continue to be gradual. But to the extent that this shift continues, it's expected that cable franchise fees will decrease in the future. This is because they're calculated as a percentage of providers' gross revenue from cable service. And it's anticipated that these decreases could become more widespread. The recommendations in the report, which can be found on page 9, also remain unchanged from the draft. Staff identified alternatives to the current tax and fee structure and cable franchising laws based on a review of other states and on conversations with stakeholders. And these alternatives actually they're described in detail on pages 34 through 43 of the report. And if you're looking in the summary section, they're summarized on pages 7 through 9. But because each of the alternatives identified would increase costs for the state or its local governments or impose taxes on cable's competitors that don't deploy infrastructure in public rights-of-way, because cable franchise fees originated, at least in part, to compensate local governments for providers' use of public rights-of-way, because the FCC rule changes could reduce the compensation that some local governments receive, and because the sales taxes that already apply to these services are already similar to each other, the report recommends no immediate changes in the state's tax and fee structure or its cable franchising laws. However, we did find that there appear to be several local governments that are allocating their cable franchise fees for services that have maintenance of effort requirements. And again, because it's anticipated that franchise fee revenue might decrease in the future, the report recommends that local governments consider no longer using this revenue to fund these types of services. I will close. I know we already had a conversation about next steps and issues for future study with our upcoming broadband update and our small cell report. But in this report, we do include several issues that were raised through the course of research for it, either by commission members or in conversations with stakeholders. And the report, these can be found on page 10 in the summary, and they're discussed in detail, I think, on pages 44 through 47. The report proposes that these issues be included in the update to the Commission's broadband report, which is being prepared in response to the directive of the Broadband Accessibility Act of 2017. I can go through those in detail if you'd like. There's a list of them on page 10. But if there are nothing else, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have, and I would appreciate any guidance that any additional guidance that you might have regarding issues for the upcoming broadband update. And if nothing else, then I will request approval of the report. Thank you.
Questions? Have you looked on page 10 at the several concerns about Tennessee's current tax and fee framework? There are several findings there that are very interesting, if you've had a chance. Mayor Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you talked about going forward, that counties need to consider that the franchise fees might go down, and if they're taking it into the general fund and it's not a maintenance of effort situation, that's what you're recommending. Do you know how many counties are putting this into education?
So I don't have a complete count of that, but from the audit data that we were able to obtain from the Comptroller's office, there appear to be a handful. It's not many that we've seen, but there are a handful that are allocating directly to K-12 education.
Those counties will be faced then with possibly having to raise their property tax to offset the loss in cable.
To the extent that they would have to.
That brings on another situation. If the maintenance of effort's going to a county school system and not to a special school district from the franchise fees, how would that impact the county further?
That's a good question. We did not look at this in this report. I might have to defer to our multi-system
Okay, thank you very much.
to address that.
All right, questions, comments? All right, Jeff?
I know that this third report and order that just was released by the FCC on August 2nd, I believe. And I'm pretty positive it's going to be challenged. There's going to be a court challenge from groups of municipal governments at least, because they're wanting to charge the in-kind as a franchise fee, and how this may affect PEG channels, PEG access, PEG facilities. I know that we had talked last time. I'd like to kind of see, at least from a state level, big believer in PEG access. Whether, you know, I feel like we need it more on a regional basis. Usually you'll have one provider will give, let's say in Smyrna, that will have maybe one access for Smyrna's Channel 3. But it'd be nice to see on a regional basis for connecting people together to see if they wind up going through a state franchise of encouraging regional access to PEG channels where you could see Murfreesboro or you could see those neighboring communities. And I'd like to see if, as we go forward, if there could be some kind of concentration towards at least PEG access, because it looks like FCC is going to kind of control what we can receive anyway as far as credits towards franchise fees, because it looks like the in-kind is going to be the biggest challenge, because they're allowed to put their fair market value onto that now under this order, and I think that's going to hurt us the most as far as the income.
Yes, sir.
All right, other questions or comments? All right, we're to approve this today, is that right? Have you had a sufficient chance to review it? Do we have a motion to approve the final report?
Mr. Chairman, do we have a quorum?
I think
We do.
we do. All right, we have a quorum. Do we have a motion to approve the final report? Who is that? All right, Mayor Greer moves, Senator Lundberg seconds. They reminded me yesterday I wasn't mentioning that, so the minutes wouldn't be correct, so y'all remind me to do that from now on. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, if we're ready to vote, all in favor of approving the final report, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, passes. Thank you, it's approved.
Thank you.
We're down to our final report today, I think. It's Senate Joint Resolution 593, Multi-School Systems Within Counties Draft Report for Review and Comment. Michael, or Mr. Mount, you're going to handle that. We do have Senator Gardenhire here, who called me about 11 o'clock last night and said he would like to be here, and we invited him. Appreciate him. He had a breakfast meeting in Chattanooga and then had to come up. So, with permission of the group, if you'd like to introduce us to the concept, I would like for him to explain what brought this to us, so that we make sure we're covering the correct thing, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Michael Mount. I'm presenting for our draft report on the effects of sharing of resources among school systems in counties with more than one school system. And there should be a one-pager on this. K-12 public education in Tennessee is provided by county school systems, city school systems, and special school districts. 30 of the state's 95 counties have more than one school system, and state law requires that these multi-system counties share local revenue with all the school systems in the same county. For city and special school districts, by contrast, there are no sharing requirements, but of course, if they choose to share, they can, for example, through an interlocal agreement. Some county officials in Tennessee expressed concern that these sharing requirements favor city school systems and special school districts at the expense of the county school systems. In response to this concern, Senate Joint Resolution 593 directed TACIR to study the effects of sharing the resources among school systems in multi-system counties. The commission report finds that state sharing requirements for local revenue contribute to funding disparities among school systems in most multi-system counties, and that they appear to favor the city school systems and the special school districts over the county school systems, and that there are alternatives that would minimize the intra-county disparities while ensuring that taxpayers derive similar benefits from taxes that they pay, regardless of where they live. Senate Joint Resolution 593 further noted that the creation of new school districts has in the past created conflict regarding the ownership of existing school buildings and facilities. There is no process in state law for determining the disposition of school property following the creation of a new city school system. In response, this report also considers options for the transfer of school property to new city school systems, and it finds that the state can provide greater predictability and fairness for school systems and taxpayers in this process, and which might also reduce the likelihood of litigation.
All right, Mr. Mount, can I interrupt you now?
Yeah.
Senator Gardenhire, I think we're now to the gist of the issue that you brought to us. Would you mind to come up and explain to us your concerns? You can use the table or the podium, whichever you prefer. Thank you for being here. Raise your right hand, please. Raise your right hand, please.
I can swear better if I don't have both hands up. Pardon my dress, but last time I tried to wear a tie while riding my motorcycle, I got choked to death, so I just dressed like this. Little background. In the 1980s, I served on the U.S. Department of Labor's ERISA Advisory Council. And during that time period, I was on several committees that the Secretary of Labor asked me to be on, and then later chairman. And one thing I learned during that time, and then a second time when I was reappointed under the Bush administration to the same council but different designation, and the same underlying theme was involved in everything that has to do with retirement plans and those plans covered by ERISA. And that was a process. Process is the most important part of ERISA law. So with that background in mind, and then when I went to the PBGC, Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, appointed by President Bush, and we took over pension plans, when we took them over, we found out that there was no process involved in dealing with the assets and liabilities and things like that. So there's an underlying theme, you got to have a good process to solve problems. With that in mind, several communities have wanted, for one reason or another, to start their own school system or school district. And several of them came to me just because they knew I had a background in doing things, and plus I was in the state Senate, and asked me to get involved in it. And I said, look, I'm not getting involved in the issue of should you do it or should you not do it. What's the issues involved? I don't want to hear that. I want to know what the process is. And the process that I discovered is they go through several hoops, about three hoops before they get to start a new schools district. And then the fight starts. And the fight is a lot of legal lawsuits filed on who owes what and everything else. So I tried to come up a year or two ago with a process or a formula to which these school districts, the old school district and new school district, could come up with a method of determining the asset value and determine that, get that determined first. Not let it be the fourth hoop to jump through, but let it be the first hoop to jump through. And the example that I came up with, which is by no means the gospel, it can be refined or changed or however, but the thought was the new community or school district hire a real estate appraiser, and that can put a dollar value as best they could on the assets that the school has. What's the school books worth? What's the desk worth? What's the all the things that go into school buildings and things, minus the depreciation. minus what the taxpayers have put into it, and come up with a value. And then they also hire an accountant that can deal with all the intrinsic items that were involved in building that school over the years, and how much of each of that community actually donated at a proportion to the losing school district to offset what the cost would be. And they come up with a figure. At the same time, the school system that's losing that school comes up with the same process to come up with a figure. And then they go to binding arbitration. And the arbitrator looks at both sides. So let's use an example. Let's say Lookout Mountain is going to lose a elementary school, which is in the plans, and that's in my district. So I'll use them as an example. And let's say the town of Lookout Mountain says, well, that school is worth $10 million. We've calculated it up, it's worth $10 million. Now, there's no other school on that mountain. That's the only one. We're going to close it and send them off the mountain down to the different schools. And let's say the Hamilton County School District says, no, that school's worth $15 million. And you can't have that school unless you give us $15 million. Well, obviously, what's going to happen? They're going to go to court, and they're probably going to pay $2 or $3 million in attorney's fees. No offense to attorneys that may be on this board, but they're going to pay $2 or $3 million in attorney. Sorry, Mike, I'm sorry. $2 or $3 million that the taxpayers will be gouged. I mean, have to spend to defend this situation, and but that's not necessary. So they go to binding arbitration, and the arbitrator says, you know, I've looked at these numbers, I've heard the testimony, I've read the figures, I've talked to the people, and I think that's worth $12.5 million. At that point, the new school system has the option to say, we'll take it. The losing school system at that point has no choice. It's binding on them to sell it for $12.5 million. Other side of the coin is the new school district can say, we just can't afford $12.5 million. All we can do is 10. That's our top dollar. Okay, too bad. That ends all the discussion. And so what you do is you cut down all the extra lawsuits, you cut down all the emotions, which are tremendously high in this thing by everybody, on either when you keep the schools, not keep the school, or you're for public schools, or you're for charter schools. What's the deal? How can you punish us, or whatever? All that goes out the window, and then it becomes a simple dollar and cents because you have established ahead of time a process to go through that does not take into account emotion or political agendas or anything else. That's what brought me to the table on this issue of how to get involved in it, and that's why I'm here today, to just explain where I'm coming from. Not I'm for this or against this, I'm for establishing a process that they all have to go through to do this. And Senator Lundberg, I was not referring to you as the lawyer, by the way. I was not. Don't be offended. Is there any questions anybody has by chance?
Questions? Mayor McDonald, when you all created your system, did you run into this problem?
Yeah, we had a federal lawsuit that had been filed while we were working up here to get it passed. And the determination, the agreement of the federal court was in keeping with the Prescott-Lennox case, that it found that facilities are public trust, and therefore the building should follow the children. And so we ended up arbitrating over the cost of the OPEB. What would the cost be for the teachers, not for the buildings? And so we're paying an amount every year for 12 years. But in that, it does, that cuts both ways. If there was a school that we said, well, we have too many elementary schools, we'll just shut one, it goes back to the other school system because it is meant to be used by children as a school. So that's how we resolved ours, and that's what I would hope the legislature would consider as was mentioned to me by one of the staff members working on this case from the legal side, the Prescott Lennox case is an older case, but has been recognized. There's case history that supports it, but it is not the law at this point. And that would be what I would be proposing, that we would consider those buildings as public trust. And if children are, all of the community paid in to build buildings so that all the children could be educated, you're still going to be educating those children in this other system. And that because it is a public trust, as long as that's the use, that would be able to be transferred. And you could talk about the other things like the OPEB or other things that might be potential cost to the system that is losing. But anyway, to answer your question, yes, we did run into it, and that's how we dealt with it.
That's interesting. I'm confused, though. When you all took over a school building, let's say it was paid for.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get that? In other words, the building follows the child, therefore there's no payment for the physical location. However, if you take the teachers, then you have all their funding obligations or OPEB.
The retirement cost of that teacher that would be going to the new system, but would have rights to the retirement that they had earned in the previous system.
Sure. What if that building had $4 million owed against it, and there were bonds outstanding? Shelby County was paying $4 million remaining on that building. Did that $4 million transfer to the city school system? In other words, the equity followed the student, but the debt, where did the debt go?
Well, in our case, all of the school buildings were paid for.
Oh, okay.
So that, but I don't believe that came up. Don't recall it.
So there was no process to determine who pays who what.
Well, again, it followed the student, and that would be I think, something that we could should look at, to say if there is debt, should everyone in the county pay for the remaining debt for this new school system, for that building? And I might argue that point one way, and someone else might argue it a different. But there is debt there, and the question would be who would continue to pay that. That is not something I recall coming up in our arbitration. As I said, we went with the OPEB. It was the cost of the teachers, not the buildings, and we have 12 years that we're paying the OPEB cost, and at the end of that 12 years, the school building piece goes away. So if we don't use it as a school building, we still have it after 12 years.
Okay. Senator Gardenhire, does that address any of the issues that you're foreseeing?
Yes, that's why, thank you, Chairman Carter. That's why I mentioned about you hire an accountant that can figure those things up. But if the school teachers, and I don't know what your situation was, we're in the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement Plan and those, and if they are so choose and the new system so chooses to hire those teachers back and they're not transferred to other schools, then I would assume that they'd still stay under the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System and all the benefits that they had to go with it if the city or new system decided to stay in those retirement benefit programs. They don't have to, but they could.
If I could just respond to that.
Sure, please.
I think that's the position we took, but the federal judge felt that there was some elongated cost to the first system in the OPEB cost. It's not just the retirement, it's the health insurance piece, probably more than just the retirement. That is the bigger piece, is that the health insurance cost for them, because many of them could retire from the other system and still have their health insurance being paid by the other system. And so it was that cost that was captured in our payments.
Okay. Mayor Anderson, you had SALT recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, I might take a little different position than my colleague. In Williamson County, I can speak very specific, and it's possible there'll be a city that will take on the role of a new school system. So if I'm looking at, and funding is always on the county commission side. That's the debt side, debt load. And debt services never figured up into appraisal values. Now, if counties are being forced by a new city school system, that's different, a different model than I would use if I was in the business side than what's been leveraged down here. So I come from the private side of 28 years. Now I've been in the political side, and oftentimes we fail to realize that many times schools are being built, particularly in our area, and being funded by debt. I'm going to repeat that again. Debt is not figured in appraisal calculations. So if you're being forced to sell something, you should always keep in mind, get the higher, in my opinion, you ought to get the higher of a market value of the assets, or some formula that comes together that properly compensates the party that is not wanting to lose that capital asset. And in our county, and I would think it's true in a lot of counties, buildings are appreciated in value. And that's hard to predict in the future. I realize that. But I think I know that the struggle will be between what is that value of that building today. Now, if you're in the real world, away from politics, there's another way to do it. It's put it up for the highest bid, put a price on it, get it back over to the county commission. Maybe that's an answer. Pull that asset where it was being paid for all along from the county commission side, pull it back into the county commission side and see if they want to surplus it or see if they want to rent it. There's nothing wrong with government taking a building and seeing what its best use would be in a particular area. That would be some of my remarks for you to think about.
All right. Senator Gardenhire, response?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayor, you sounded like you just endorsed my plan. My plan is to have a process. I didn't say what the process was. I just gave a thought in my mind of what a process may look like. But if you have that process in mind in law, and by the way, I've got 43 years in private business. This is a part-time gig for me, not full-time. But in business, if you're negotiating a merger, which I did a lot of, if you're negotiating a merger between companies, you sit down and come up with it. And each side has the ability to walk away from the deal. But all I'm saying is, in the law, we need to define what a process they go through to reach that decision. And that's all I'm advocating. And right now, there is no process in place. It's just a matter of everybody going to court and fighting it out and spending a lot of money, and then may or may not get the results that you want. We may tweak the process. Y'all may tweak the process. The House may tweak it. The Senate may tweak it. But somewhere there needs to be something in the law that says this is the steps you go through to determine the value of that asset, however you do it, and then get it done.
I would agree with you. I was simply echoing some, but the key here is the word forced. You know, citizens in a geographic boundary make a determination if they want to get into the school business. In the private sector, the forced is called condemnation, and we will go to court and we will obtain values. So if you can get that process down and get agreement with that, then you may have some. I'm again agreeing with you. The process is critical during this process, but my 2 cents worth.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from members? I got lots of county and city folks down here. Anyone?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I've got some questions and comments, but it's more about the disparity in funding than how we allocate buildings when we have a new school. So they're really not germane to the topic we've just been discussing.
All right. Other questions or comments? All right, Senator Gardenhire, anything else?
I appreciate y'all giving me time.
Sure, absolutely. Why don't you stay up here and let Bob finish his presentation? We just stopped at a point where we thought you fit in case additional questions come up. Mr. Morrow?
Michael Mount.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Based on these findings, the report makes 2 sets of recommendations for improving state sharing requirements for local revenue. Stakeholders acknowledge that the county's ability to use countywide revenue in lieu of bonds to fund education capital expenditures without sharing may be unfair to taxpayers living in city school systems or in special school districts, but it's one of only a few ways that the county can address spending equity under the law. Because countywide property tax and countywide local option sales tax apply to property and sales within the cities and the special school districts, the General Assembly could require that the county share this revenue when it is used for the capital education expenditures, just as counties already have to share it when it's used for education operations and maintenance. But if the state does so, it should also consider adopting other alternatives that would improve spending equity in counties with multiple school systems while adhering to principles of taxpayer equity. One alternative that could improve both spending equity and taxpayer equity is to remove the requirement that counties share their portion of the unearmarked half of the local option sales tax when it is budgeted for education operations and maintenance. Another alternative would be that would decrease disparities for the students as well as the taxpayers would be to transition from calculating fiscal capacity at the county level to calculating it at the system level. Regardless of any changes the state makes, and I should mention that a system-level fiscal capacity model was recommended in the past in the early 2000s by the Task Force on Teacher Pay and by the BEP Review Committee. Regardless of any changes the state makes, it's important to provide local governments with a degree of certainty about how local revenue for education is required to be shared. Because changes in law governing the distribution of the mixed drink tax is temporary, and because the method appears to adhere to principles of spending equity and taxpayer equity, the General Assembly should remove the expiration on the current method in state law for distributing the mixed drink tax proceeds. This report also makes 2 recommendations for improving the process of transferring school property from counties to new city school systems. Because of the uncertainty and surrounding this issue in current law, the General Assembly should provide a method in state law for transferring school property, both real and personal, to new city school systems. An ad hoc committee could be created to determine what property should be transferred and what the city should pay for it. But whoever determines what the city should pay should consider both the past and future contributions of the city and the county to procure and maintain the property in question. The relevant unit cost in the BEP could also be used to calculate the value of real and personal property subject to the transfer. For instance, the textbook unit costs are based on the actual cost of the textbooks that will be purchased for the upcoming school year. To ensure that city residents voting in the referendum on whether to form a new city school system know what it will cost to acquire all the property it will need to operate the school system, the General Assembly should require that the purchase price of the property be determined before the city referendum on the creation of the city school system. That is my presentation. Any questions?
Comments? Mayor McDonald?
Well, I ought to let Mayor Bickers go first, and then why don't I do that? Why don't I defer to him, because I think we're going to ask questions about the same thing, and then if he's not gotten everything, I'll sweep up.
Mayor Bickers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me preface my questions with the comment that disparity in what has been a perceived disparity between funding in the county school systems and the city or independent school districts in multi-district counties is a significant issue. And now it looks like it wasn't just a perceived issue, it is a reality based upon the numbers that you have. And it's hard to take issue with the argument that one of our greatest responsibilities as stewards of our communities is to educate our children, to give them the tools they need to be successful, and to make sure we treat all of our children equal in giving them that opportunity. And what I've learned is there's a funding mechanism in place that I've yet to have an elected official explain to me just exactly how it works. The educators can't tell you how it works, and I assure you our students have no clue how it works, other than the parents of kids that attend this county schools are told, well, they have this formula that means your kids are less valuable than kids in other counties, and it's all a problem of this formula. So I throw out, I don't understand how it could possibly be good public policy to have a funding formula that is so significant and impactful on the future that nobody understands. Now, I don't know whose fault that is, who can fix it, but surely we can do better, because it's the problem is not being solved when people don't understand how the taxpayer dollars are being allocated and why kids are treated differently. And it's impacts not just, and the impacts are a way I would suggest that you didn't really look at in this report. And that's when you've got most multi-district schools within a county. It creates a situation where parents of means, if you've got city schools or independent school districts that accept tuition students, it creates a situation where parents who have the means to afford tuition, in effect, have choice. They can decide, do I want my child to attend a county school or the city school? Vouchers created quite a bit of angst up here. Well, that's in essence a voucher system, right? If a parent can say, I can choose where my BEP dollars go, to the county system or to a city system, that's exactly what's going on. And I will admit my responsibility. My parents paid tuition for me and my brother to attend Tullahoma City schools, and my wife and I paid tuition for our children to attend a city school because we did not perceive equality and opportunity. But I think that's something that we got to look at. And maybe as we go forward with this, and I realize this is a draft report, what percentage of the students in our independent or city schools are tuition students, right? They're students that otherwise would be going. Then we can calculate the dollars lost. But it's not just dollars lost, because we're losing some students who would be great resources to have in the county system aren't there because they're leaving the county system. So I think, that may go, and it may be the solution, and it's not one my friends in the cities would like, but to simply say the BEP goes to the county, the district of residence. So if you pay tuition, the BEP dollars don't go. you don't punish the county, but there's got to be a way to take that into consideration. And the other thing that, what we hear is, well, you all should spend more. And I look for Blount County, and if I look back on the table starting on 17, the local share of my county is $4,255 per student. And if I look at what the local share is in other counties, now Williamson's doing a whole lot more than we are, but it's hard for me to advocate that we ought to spend more. Right? We ought to raise the property tax when they look and say, aren't we doing a fair share with what everybody else, other counties are doing? So I don't, perhaps the system-wide evaluation of physical capacity, I think that looks like that'd be about $2 million impact in Blount County. Maybe that's a step, but I'm not sure that solves the problem. But I appreciate this good work, because there's what we had believed to be the case, we now know was the case. I live in a municipality, in a mayor municipality, where probably half of my kids are tuition kids. And I wish it wasn't so, but that's impact, and our county school director and people will tell you it's an issue. And I didn't see that addressed, and maybe that's maybe fairly easy to do, is just reach out to those school systems and say what percentage of your students are tuition students, and maybe even what they pay, because what we pay, as I mentioned to you when we spoke, was insignificant, all right, when it came to what it cost to educate. The cost of tuition wasn't really a factor. But I appreciate the work. I think this is, we've dealt with lots and lots of significant issues recently, and today, who would have known tires, for example, were such an important issue for us to look at. And I appreciate that not all city mayors see the world as I do, but I think this is an issue that we have to address, because as I've said up here before, the angst and the disagreement between local governments at the city and the county level is what has troubled me the most, when we all be working together. And I'm absolutely convinced that school funding is probably at the root of 75% or more of the disagreements that we have at the local government level. So I've said way too much, but I appreciate your report and would encourage you perhaps to dig a little deeper into some of these other areas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Mayor McDonald?
So he's right. At least this city mayor sees things a little differently in terms of the right of cities and special school districts to determine if they would like to, and their citizens agree, because you go to referendum, to pay more so that the children can receive more. That's a decision that those citizens make. Now, I'm in a blue-collar, middle-class community. We have rich and we have poor and lots in between. 10th largest city in Tennessee. And it passed overwhelmingly to pay more so they would get more. Now, we don't charge tuition right now. We allow people to come in, and if they keep their grades up and act right, they can stay there. If they don't get a renewal on that for as long as open seats are available, which there aren't any in the high school or the freshman academy. There are some in the middle school, and there are a lot in the elementary school, and all of those are full. But they don't, all we get is the ADA that follows the student. And so I think the conclusions 1 and 2 under the idea of taxpayer equity, these taxpayers are also paying a county tax that goes to everybody's schools in addition to their own. And so the fact that they decide to be doubly taxed, but yet you would punish them in some way saying that there is not equity, I believe is a discrimination. I believe there is disparity. I believe BEP is broken. He kept calling it the formula. Well, I'm going to call it what it is. It's the BEP. And it is woefully broken. And something very frustrating to local officials is for there to be statements in the news coming out of Nashville that education is fully funded. And what was really said was BEP was fully funded, but BEP doesn't fully fund education. There's so many unpaid spots that you have to have and underpaid spots. So I don't know how, I do agree, I don't know how we can deal with the multi-school systems without addressing the BEP formula. And, you know, as I think Mayor Bickers was saying, you know, when you got one county that gets $8,000 or $10,000 per student from the state, and then you've got others that get $2,000 from the state, based on the physical capacity model, that's problematic for us, for those of us that have both affluent and non-affluent citizens in our communities and in our counties. So I think nobody wants to do it. I serve on BEP. They don't want to do it. They want TACIR to do it. TACIR doesn't want to do it. They want somebody else to do it. The legislature doesn't want to do it, but I don't think we can fix this without addressing the weaknesses in BEP. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other comments? I'm sorry, Mayor Anderson?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One comment, and has nothing against these two comments, that I often wrestle with when we've currently, for an example, we have currently 2 schools, one to be open in January this year, one to be open in August, and bought some land to build a new one, and I've got to look at more land next month. But I do struggle with the rationale for revenue sharing with systems that aren't growing. So we share with our special school district, but that system's population base is really not growing. The geographic lines were set by the legislators in the mid-'80s that they can't grow. But we do share with them. And we share a pro rata share. But if I use that same model in a business model, we have 49 schools. So when I build one school, I should share with each one of them. And that's not the world we live in. And I think you have to be mindful of that systems that choose or are, that you don't always get to share with the other, in our case, 48. Just because we add $5 million to one school for an existing building, that doesn't mean that we have to add it every other schools. Now, in the early days, back in the 80s when I was around, we did do some of that to get the votes to pick up on the education side. I'm a big boy. I'll acknowledge that. So you weren't going to build one school in one area, and you got 24 votes. You weren't going to get 13 votes out of that. So you had to do some things to create this model that we've got. But when you look at a funding model have to be real careful because the taxpayers don't understand how the ADA works. I agree with both my colleagues here. It's not cheap to provide public education. There's a side of me that I'm always reminded by my late mother that you do provide quality education for all walks of boys and girls, all colors, and all disabilities. And you have to do that in a way that's done, that's fair to all, so that all will understand that. We push that model pretty hard in Williamson County, and there are a lot of people move into our areas just for that latter statement. It's expensive. It's very expensive. But for the most part, our residents have said, we'll absorb it, we'll carry it on, but I got to go back to my colleague here and the one next to Blount County. The BEP model needs to be re-looked at. I made a comment to our chairman yesterday. Everybody's saying the BEP is fully funded at their level. They're 100% right. But it is broke what's getting to us. We're fortunate. We live in an affluent community that will pay for that, Senator, as you go through yours. They cherish public education, but it is also part of our it's part of our economic development package that we have. It is part of it. You don't get any of our dollars out of the tax, on the tax side from schools going to business under any pilot program or any other program. We do not do that. We cherish public education. But I'm still swinging that bat for all of our kids and all of our parents. But it's a financial nightmare what our debt load service is in Williamson County compared to anybody else across this state. But we believe in education.
Cliff, you had a couple of comments at this point would fit in.
I just want to remind the members, this is another one of those studies where we're doing some concurrent studies concurrent at the same time, yeah. Anyways, so where there's a lot of overlap in the studies. And one of the challenges is how to comb that out and what to address in this one and what to hold off on for the other one. And some of these issues, related to the BEP are things that we've decided that we're going to address more in the next stage of the holistic report on local resources and revenue, which you recall we've already done the one report on the internet sales, and we owe you a report at the next meeting on the education component of that. So I believe that a lot more of these issues related to the BEP, related to state share taxes, more of that's going to come up in that report. We understand the position of several of the members and the connection of this to the fiscal capacity part that we brought up in this report, but we were trying to focus more on just very specific system level things, and then we want to address anything related to resources or revenue in the BEP in the report that deals with all systems in education in all counties statewide.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that we don't get lost in the funding process of trading or exchanging assets between school systems with BEP needs that have to be looked at. I don't want one to confuse the other or one to get lost or influence the other. Both are two significant and significantly important issues not to be considered separately. Where are we, Mr. Mount? Are you still?
Just question.
Okay.
Any questions?
All right. Anything else from Mr. Mount?
Just one.
Sure, Mayor.
Your report discusses system-wide calculation of fiscal capacity versus county-wide. If we were to go to a system-wide, which it looks like would alleviate some of the issue, is that something that is that a legislative fix? Is the legislature going to have to say we're going to change that?
Yeah, some of the previous discussion was that we do view that there would be a need for more authorization outside of this commission for that change to happen.
And part of the issue is that now in statute, there are actually two fiscal capacity models, both county level, one produced by TACIR and one produced by the Center for Business and Economic Research at University of Tennessee. We're not presuming that a system level model would necessarily be the prototype model that we developed based on the TACIR model back in 2005. It could be a system level model based on the CBER model. It could be something, a two-tier model that only redistributes within multi-system and treats the counties the same as they're treated now. That would be, I would think, would take a considerable amount of research and negotiation with various stakeholders in the state, not just this commission.
All right, anything else? Mayor McDonald.
Just to comment that wherever we look at it, and I don't think if a formula is broken and you're taking a part of the formula and looking at that, you're still in a broken formula. So I don't think, again, I would repeat, I don't think you can look at this part of it without acknowledging the brokenness of BEP. Well, anyway, I do think that it should be, as we look at the formula piece of it, it should be something that most of our citizens can understand. It's just wrong to legislate in a way that people can't understand. That's not transparent government. And, you know, I know we got here back, was it 88 around? What is that? Right. So around 88, you know, with the small schools lawsuit and those kinds of things, it got more cumbersome. But as we look at potentially rewriting it, let us use a motto that, you know, to be transparent, it must be able to be understood.
Yes. Dr. Park?
And I would add that was, I think, part of the goal of BEP 2.0, at least on the fiscal capacity side. And just to remind everyone, fiscal capacity is the distribution portion of the BEP. So is really, the BEP is a component-based model formula, and then fiscal capacity decides what each county or what each system pays as their share of the local share. But part of BEP 2.0 was to make it the system more, the fiscal capacity side of it, easier to understand and more transparent, which is how we ended up with the tax capacity model that CBER developed, which is now half of a model. So we've actually ended up with two pieces, the one that was already in place and one that was supposed to be more transparent, arguably. So it's actually gotten a little bit more confused.
Yes. Mayor Brooks.
Thanks, Chairman. And I sit here listening to both sides of the argument now as a mayor, and I feel the transparency problem, because it was part of my past that the press releases went out that we have fully funded BEP, as Mayor Anderson talked about, and we did not, in fact, because there was confusion between were we funding 1.0 and then when 2.0 came out. So I actually welcome this discussion and transparency and debate, because now that I am home a lot more, and the Cleveland City School System has some very direct questions, as do my friends who are city residents but teach in the county system, about their raises that we proclaimed we were sending down to the local level. And in fact, because there was a drop in enrollment 2 years ago, somehow they didn't qualify or could use that money for other uses, reading coaches and things. And so Chairman, I welcome this discussion, and I pray that we can be a part of the solution.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Essential.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Just quickly, because I know we're ready to go. Mr. Bont, the numbers for, if you go from a county system to basically a school district system, the researchers already have the numbers for that, don't they? Those calculations have been, you know who the winners are going to be, who the losers are, how that money is going to be distributed. So we already know, and it may be in the book here, we already know which systems would benefit, which systems would not, or how that would play out in terms of the budget.
Yes, it's Appendix D.
Okay.
It's on page 65.
No, and I'm not referring anyone to that, but those numbers are already in there.
Yeah.
So you can you get an idea of how that would work. The other point I want to make is that in the TACIR model and versus with the Fox model, I never could understand in the Fox model for fiscal capacity why income of citizens was never considered as part of the fiscal capacity model there. It's not considered, I don't believe. And I know that was debated for a while, but I always wondered why that was not a consideration when the CBER model was put together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Lepar, you had a comment you'd like to make?
I just wanted to clarify on Appendix D, on those estimates in Appendix D, that those are, again, using an updated version of the prototype model that was developed by TACIR in 2005. So again, we can't presume that if you were to go to system level model that it would be that model. It could be a different approach. So just keep that in mind. The winners and losers in that aren't necessarily who the winners and losers would be. It would just depend on the model you actually develop to do a system level model. Yeah.
Mr. Mount, any other questions or comments? Let's allow Senator Gardenhire, now that he's sat through this, and to close and with any comments or questions he might have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, just want to keep on track. This has to do with a process to determine the values of assets, which will include all that. But let me just, in a quick example, explain what BEP is. About 10, 15 years ago, I was going through Atlanta and in a multi-car wreck. I was the second to the last person in the wreck. We all had to go to the Atlanta City Court, and I appeared in front of this old crusty judge who'd been there for decades. And I was the only one in a suit and tie in the whole courtroom. And I was the last one to be called because I wasn't from Atlanta. I was from out of town, out of state. And the judge listened to my short testimony that I gave, and he said, well, that'll be $250.50. And I said, Your Honor, I don't understand. You fined everybody else in this courtroom $125.25. Why me? He took his glasses off, and he said, because you look like you can afford it. Now, that explains the BEP formula. In my example a while ago of Lookout Mountain, having their elementary school closed, you take Lookout Mountain out of Hamilton County's BEP formula, and the whole county gets more money. Every student in that county will get more money because Lookout Mountain is taken out of that formula. If you use the city of East Ridge as an example, which is in my district, and you take them out of the BEP formula, the students at East Ridge, which is a blue collar and below community with over 50% of the houses in East Ridge being rental houses, those students will get more money. But this is not about the BEP and how it's calculated. This right here is about setting up a process to figure out what is equitable in setting up a new school district if they do it. That's all this is about. And I appreciate you letting me come up here, I really do. And I really, believe it or not, I was interested in the spare tire deal that y'all had earlier, and that was most interesting. But side note, I went to Mexico on a mission trip, took all my shots and everything, and the only mosquito that bit me was in the Atlanta airport, not in Mexico.
A tiger mosquito, no doubt. All right, other questions or comments? I can't wait to get home and explain to my wife about how wonderful our discussion on abandoned tires was. I'm not sure she's going to follow that very far, but I'll give it my best shot. We have a real problem. Mayor Greer had to leave, but he had told us several months ago about it. I have a friend out in Alamo, Tennessee that had a horrible problem with it and was calling me a couple of years ago about why we can't get something done on this. I think now we all understand the significance of it. I hope TACIR can be a leader in trying to resolve the problem. Any other questions or comments? We need to pick our next meeting date. We show here dates December 4 and 5, December 11 and 12. What's good for the body? Okay, so the 4th and 5th of December seems to be out. Let's look at 11 and 12. How does that meet the members? Can we do 11 and 12? All right. If there are no objections, then we'll set those for the 11th and the 12th. Do we want to go ahead and set the winter meeting now?
If we can.
Okay. All right, January 16 and 17 or 30 and 31. What's your pleasure? That's a long way in advance. 16, 17 is, we'll be back in session, so that's good for us, but I don't know about the rest of you folks. Would the 16th and 17th work? Or we can do 30, 31.
30, 31 would not work for me.
Okay. What about 16, 17? Is that okay? All right. Then the winter meeting will be January the 16th and the 17th. And our next meeting will be November the, what did we go with, 11 and 12?
December 11th.
December, yeah, okay. All right. We're good on that? Have I got you sufficiently confused to allow you to leave? Folks, thank you so much.
Non-debatable.
We're adjourned. Anything we need?